In an old house, an old woman gathers her knitting supplies. This is a special project for a little boy named Tommy she loves dearly. She knits furiously, and soon the mix of cotton, synthetic fiber, and cloth of every color turn from raw materials into something else. A teddy bear. She puts the finishing touches on the bear. This is a very special bear, after all, and sends the patchwork bear off to its destination with a red Get Well card. The card is labeled Kairos the Bear, and inside she writes a personal note. To Tommy, because only time can mend all wounds. Love, Grammy. But this package of love would never reach its destination. SCP-2295 was found at the site of a crashed mail truck, and it looks exactly like a standard handmade teddy bear, with one difference. On the left side of its chest, just under its jaunty tan bow, it wears a heart-shaped pin, but not a standard cartoon heart. This is a disturbingly realistic, anatomically correct pin of a heart organ. And that's because SCP-2295 has a specific purpose, and it's one that has everything to do with actual human organs. SCP-2295 spends most of its time completely inert, spending its days as just another cuddly stuffed toy. Tests performed on the toy revealed that it had no unusual properties, and seems to be a normal handmade keepsake. That is, until someone is injured in its presence. Not any injury will do. A paper cut or even a broken arm, for example, won't do much to activate its anomalous properties. But if it detects a critical injury to a human organ nearby, it will trigger a secret power, one that the Foundation is still trying to figure out how it works. Because SCP-2295 is a miracle worker. When it senses the presence of someone with a serious injury to an organ and is within 2 meters of them, SCP-2295 springs into action. Suddenly, from unknown sources, the bear will produce objects including scissors, white thread, and sewing needles or a crocheting hook from its mouth. If there are any crafting supplies on hand, it will incorporate those as well. And then it gets to work. Despite only having hands made of fabric and stuffing with no fingers, the anomalous bear is still able to craft what will end up being a patchwork recreation of the damaged human's organ. Cute, if a little creepy, but that's just the beginning. The injured person mysteriously falls unconscious, and the patchwork organ, which the Foundation has designated as SCP-2295-1 instance, will disappear. The SCP-2295-1 instance will then physically replace the damaged organ inside the person's body. It's unknown how this happens. The patchwork organ will simply appear inside of their body, taking the place of the original lung or kidney, or whichever organ was failing. It's unknown where the original organ goes to, since it seems to just disappear as soon as the 2295-1 instance takes its place. Surprisingly, having this new cotton-stuffed heart or liver does not seem to cause any harm, and in fact it works exactly like the real thing. There are never any of the usual issues that come with a transplant, like the risk of it being rejected by the body, as the organic tissue seems to have no issue connecting with the organ, and treating it like it was there all along. In all instances of SCP-2295 performing this adorable but rudimentary surgery, the subjects have made a full and complete recovery. SCP-2295 might sound like a miracle worker, but that isn't to say that its abilities aren't without their own set of complications. When faced with 2 injured subjects, SCP-2295 seems to always gravitate towards fixing the younger subject up first, maybe owing to its creation by a grandmother who wanted to heal whatever was ailing her grandson. No one knows who Tommy was or exactly what disease or injury he was recovering from, but his grandmother clearly felt it was serious enough to create this special bear for him. While SCP-2295 will heal anyone, it seems to be primarily a guardian for the young, and it takes its duties very seriously, even to the point of self-sacrifice. While SCP-2295 is able to pull some of its supplies out of thin air, it still always needs some raw materials to craft the new organ, including fabric and stuffing. And if there are none available, SCP-2295 will obtain them the hard way. The patchwork bear will sacrifice its own body, tearing itself open and removing any fabric or stuffing it needs without any concern for its own well-being. In order to craft a new organ for its patient, it slowly regenerates its own stuffing, at the rate of around 1 gram of stuffing per day, but it needs to harvest fabric to repair its outer layer, which the Foundation happily makes available to it, offering it a variety of patterns and types. It's no surprise that a teddy bear capable of healing mortal wounds would be of great interest to the SCP Foundation, and as soon as it was recovered from the crashed mail truck, they immediately began tests to find out more about it. Could it heal literally any organ? Were there any limits to its abilities? There was only one way to find out, and the Foundation had the perfect test subjects. D-Class personnel, whose interactions with non-cuddly teddy bear SCPs frequently left them with critical external and internal injuries. The first test subject brought in, D-2353, a 38-year-old man who was in poor health not due to his work as a D-Class personnel, but from his years and years of heavy smoking. His lungs were seriously damaged, which gave him trouble breathing and made any serious physical exertion extremely difficult. He wasn't critically injured or in danger of dying immediately, but that didn't matter to SCP-2295. D-2353 quickly passed out, and the bear sprang into action. He proceeded to take 2 textile swatches, one black and one red, and create a pair of fabric lungs which it installed in the patient. When he awoke, D-2353 found he had full healthy lung function again, as if he never picked up his deadly habit. But now the Foundation researchers needed to know how SCP-2295 would do with even more complicated ailments. D-3542 was 50 years old and his heart was not in good shape. Not only did he have a serious case of atherosclerosis, which is a disease where cholesterol plaque builds up and blocks blood flow and can put you at serious risk of a heart attack, but he also had an irregular heartbeat. This D-Class was in bad shape, but that was no problem for SCP-2295, who took a collection of different colors of yarn and a crochet hook and created a plushy heart. Just like the lungs had acted as if they were completely regular organs, after the heart anomalously ended up inside the man's chest, it began to beat normally and performed all the complicated functions of a human heart. But there was one detail that shocked the onlooking doctors. Before the yarn organ had vanished, the doctors had seen that it was beating. So is there any organ that SCP-2295 can't replace? That was about to be tested when D-7894 was brought in. A 24-year-old woman, she had suffered serious burns all over her torso, left abdomen, and right leg. She was brought in and sedated to numb the agonizing pain, and researchers were worried that they had come up against the limit of SCP-2295's abilities, since the skin is the largest organ after all. But SCP-2295 wasn't fazed at all. The bear immediately started sewing segments of patchwork fabric and layering them onto the damaged skin, replacing the dermis and epidermis layer by layer. Unlike the other cases, these replacement organs are visible, and D-7894 now has patchwork skin, just like her talented surgeon. And amazingly, the fabric has the same sense of touch that her regular skin did. The final test of SCP-2295's abilities came with D-2723, who was only 18 years old. This last-minute D-Class test was performed because he was showing signs of severe cerebral hemorrhage, the kind that would cause brain damage in only minutes, and would be followed soon after by complete brain death. SCP-2295 sprung to life, but as soon as it examined the test subject, it became distressed. It started frantically grasping at random material around it, as if it didn't know what to do with them. Then it reached inside itself and provided a large chocolate bar, which it offered to the subject, sadly to no effect. It then seemed to admit defeat as it grabbed tightly onto the subject's leg. Observers reported that it was leaking a tear-like solution from its small knitted eyes as it embraced the dying D-Class in his final moments. Sadly, it seems that the human brain is the one mystery that even SCP-2295 can't solve. SCP-2295 appears to pose no threat to anyone and was classified as safe after testing. It is inactive when not in the presence of an injured person, and has never displayed hostile instincts when active. The Foundation determined that it should be stored in a standard containment locker in Site-37, where it can be kept safely until it's needed for tests or to repair an injured SCP personnel. Access is limited to those with Level 3 or higher security clearance, and any contact with the bear is highly regulated. But there is one element of SCP-2295's existence that continues to worry Foundation staff. SCP-2295's full origins and the grandmother who crafted it are unknown. The note it was found with is the only clue as to where it may have come from, but there are plenty within the Foundation who are suspicious of the veracity of this letter, and they have good reason not to be too trusting. Because another bear with similar abilities exists, and it is distinctly less benevolent than SCP-2295. SCP-1048 is also a teddy bear, but it is capable of moving on its own and communicating through gestures at all times. It was initially allowed to wander around independently, and seemed to make its home at Site-24 a happier place, but then it began to display its own crafting abilities. SCP-1048 is able to craft duplicates of itself, and while the original was seemingly harmless, the ones it made were not. These similarly shaped bears were made of disturbing materials and were extremely hostile towards any humans they encountered. The first, SCP-1048-A, was made entirely out of human ears, and when it shrieked, it caused anyone nearby to generate ear-like growths all over their bodies, eventually causing them to suffocate. The creature disappeared, and an on-site researcher was found to be missing an ear. The creations of SCP-1048 only got stranger and deadlier from there. SCP-1048-B was found in the site's cafeteria, where it was moving around in a halted, jerky fashion. It then started bursting at the seams and revealed what appeared to be a human fetus inside. When the creature screamed, it sounded like a much louder version of a human infant, and its crows caused massive internal damage to anyone around it. SCP-1048-B was killed in the ensuing conflict with Foundation agents, ending its threat. But SCP-1048 was learning deadlier techniques. When SCP-1048-C was discovered, it looked to be a teddy bear made entirely out of rusty scrap metal. When it was spotted by Dr. Carver and targeted by Foundation personnel, the creature turned violent and proved to have incredible strength, jumping through the agents who were trying to neutralize it, tearing through their bodies like tissue paper. Attempts to damage it were unsuccessful, and both it and the bear made out of ears are still on the loose along with the original SCP-1048. Capturing it is major priority for the Foundation, because no one wants to see what it will create next. Is there a connection between these two very different teddy bears? No one has been able to answer this question. The origins of SCP-1048 are unknown, and so is any connection to the mysterious grandmother who may have made Kairos the bear, but their abilities are similar, with both able to craft living objects out of seemingly any material. They just have very different ideas as to what a good use of their crafting abilities are. It is fortunate that an anomaly as potentially powerful as SCP-2295 seems to only want one thing: to help those in need, especially those who are the most vulnerable. Meet Trevor Hawthorne, now known as D4651. On the outside, he was an armed robber who murdered 2 people during a convenience store shootout in Texas. But now, since being condemned to death, he's been picked up for D-class testing by the SCP Foundation. Now also meet junior researcher Dr. Julia Reed, an aspiring Foundation scientist with an undiagnosed heart condition. The kind of heart condition that doesn't mix well with a high-pressure job at the SCP Foundation. These two woke up on the morning of December 6th, 2011, completely unaware of the fact that they were only hours away from causing one of the most devastating containment breaches Site-19 had seen in years. Many people died that day, but thankfully for everyone else, SCP-131 were there to save the day. When you think of a hero, you probably don't picture a pair of little cyborgs with one eye and the intelligence of a household cat. But this is the tale of how 2 of the most unassuming anomalies at Site-19 managed to save thousands of people from 2 of the site's most dangerous inmates. Open your eyes and keep them open. If you so much as blink, it's all over for you. How long can you hold it? Difficult, right? Now imagine you're having a staring contest with an entity that can kill you if you dare to blink for even a fraction of a second. Or even worse, a creature that could potentially kill hundreds or even thousands of people if your attention drifts from it for any amount of time. Try keeping your eyes open with that kind of crushing pressure. We're talking about two of the most deadly Euclid and Keter class anomalies out there. SCP-173, the Killer Sculpture, a violent Euclid class entity that is incapable of moving while being looked at. If ever it's unobserved, it'll snap the neck of anyone nearby. SCP-689, known as Haunter in the Dark, is an equally dangerous and even more attention-demanding statue. These two entities are beyond dangerous. Even SCP-682 is terrified of the Killer Sculpture, and researchers have been considering the use of 689 to potentially eliminate the hard-to-destroy reptile for quite some time. Their greatest concern, though, is whether the 30-centimeter-tall statue would cause too much collateral damage to Foundation personnel in the process. Trevor Hawthorne was part of the 3-man D-Class detail meant to clean out SCP-173's containment chamber at regular intervals. While on cleaning duty, 2 D-Classes can keep staring at the sculpture while the other tidies up the cell, alternating turns to blink. But that morning, Trevor had woken up in his containment cell with a killer migraine, and soon that migraine would be killing far more than just him. The containment procedures in 689's cell were also a 3-person job. 689 is a small green soapstone statue of a skeletal being sitting on a throne, believed to be some form of underworld death deity discovered by German archaeologists in India. This is a work of religious art that demands your attention, or you and anyone else who's ever seen this Keter-class nightmare will suffer a horrifying fate. Anyone who's ever seen the statue is infected by its anomalous effects. It must be observed constantly, or someone who's seen it in the past will suddenly drop dead of a severe health issue, like a stroke or multiple rupturing organs. Like the god of death the statue represents, it appears on top of the dead body of whoever it just killed. If not continually paid attention to, it'll keep hopping from person to person until it's killed everyone who's ever looked at it. Its teleporting abilities and the fact that it poses a threat to so many make this a truly formidable foe. It's kept in a constantly lit cell and is observed by 2 members of D-Class personnel at all times. But a crucial third party in the containment of SCP-689 is a member of personnel at level 2 or above. They remain in a control room, wearing a special visor to prevent them from ever seeing 689 and becoming infected themselves. If the containment fails, it's their job to throw the kill switch on the D-Class observers to prevent them from becoming vectors for infection. Today, this job fell on Dr. Julia Reed. She was linked to the 2 observers via an audio feed, allowing her to remain in constant contact with them. And she had her finger on the activation key for a pair of explosive collars that were around the D-Class's necks. Little did they know, Dr. Reed's heart was its own time bomb. Now you know what we're up against. A snap-happy sculpture, and a teleporting death statue with a hit list containing everyone who's ever glanced at it. What can SCP-131 bring to the table? The 2 small cycloptic anomalies have only one remarkable ability. They never blink. That, and a soft spot for humans. These safe-class SCPs pose no threat to their handlers, and can even form attachments to researchers and other staff who show affection towards them. Of course, forming these bonds is discouraged by Site-19's director, because it can be distracting, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. The 2 iPods, known as SCP-131-A and SCP-131-B, are identical in appearance except for their colors. A is a burnt orange, and B is a mustard yellow. The 2 of them appear to communicate with one another via high-pitched squeaking noises, and also seem to have an innate ability to detect danger occurring in the vicinity, as well as danger occurring near individuals they've bonded with. Because of their inability to cause harm and their generally affectionate demeanor, the iPods are allowed to roam around Site-19, provided they keep out of the way of researchers and stay out of restricted areas. They seem to pretty much stick to the rules, though check-ins on A and B are required every hour, just to be safe. As the iPods were moving freely around the facility, Trevor and another D-Class maintained a visual on the sculpture in its containment chamber, while a third man swept up the mixture of blood and excrement staining the concrete floors. Things were going fine, until Trevor's migraine got the better of him. A sudden flash of intense pain shot through his head, and in a moment of weakness, he made a terrible mistake. With an audible groan of pain, Trevor closed his eyes and forced his fingers to his temples. The groan had taken his fellow observer off guard, and the man's eyes flitted over to him for a fraction of a second. But a fraction of a second is all the sculpture needs. In an instant, Trevor and his fellow watcher had their necks snapped, and the third D-Class was murdered before he even had a chance to turn around. Containment protocol dictates that the door is to be sealed behind the cleaning crew while they're working with 173. But this time, perhaps due to complacency, the guards had neglected to reinforce the door. They got their heads twisted 180 degrees for their trouble. SCP-173 was loose. Mobile task forces were dispatched to aid in the recontainment effort as 173 began wreaking havoc around the facility. But things were about to get even worse. It seemed like business as usual over at the containment cell of SCP-689. 2 D-Classes observed while Dr. Reed dictated to them over an earpiece from her control center. However, what Dr. Reed thought were just minor chest pains were actually the onset of heart failure. When the 2 D-Classes heard their supervisor experiencing a fatal heart attack on the other end of the line, they began to panic. This meant their attention wasn't entirely on SCP-689, and they were further distracted by the chaos SCP-173 was causing elsewhere in the facility, murdering researchers, guards, and maintenance workers alike, which led to power outages. The lights in 689's containment cell shut down. Guards were dispatched to execute the observers, as is protocol for 689 containment breaches. But the fact that resources were already stretched thin by the 173 breach caused a fatal error in judgment from a guard posted nearby. In a panic, he opened the door to find one D-Class dead with the statue perched on his body, and the other one running straight for him in blind fear. The 2 collided and tumbled out into the hall. Both were now infected by 689's anomalous attention, and both were now doomed. Moments later, the 2 of them were dead, the statue perched on their bodies, accidentally catching the eye of several researchers and guards running to deal with the 173 situation. For these 2 deadly anomalies, it was becoming an all-you-can-kill buffet. The staff of Site-19 were now dealing with one anomaly that needed to be looked at constantly, and another that if you even glance at it, you are effectively infected with a fatal disease. The iPods, sensing an imminent danger nearby, immediately sprung into action. It would be up to these cute, harmless anomalies to save the terrified staff during this chaotic double containment breach. In a nearby hallway, a fleeing Foundation researcher heard the crunches of her colleagues' necks breaking behind her. 173 was getting closer. This thing couldn't be outrun. She turned and saw the statue standing there, just 10 feet away from her. A dead researcher laying on the ground in front of it. She was locked in a deadly staring contest with the sculpture. How long she could survive was now dependent on how long she could keep her eyes open, and it was getting harder by the second. She could feel her eyes drying. They burned under the ceiling lights. 173 just waited. This wasn't a contest. She could win. In a final moment of terror, the researcher was forced to finally close her eyes and she waited for the crunch. But it never came. Instead, she heard familiar high-pitched squeaking noises. She opened her eyes, crying tears of relief, as she saw SCP-131-A sitting behind 173, watching it with its constant, unblinking gaze. The killer sculpture was paralyzed by a cheerful little safe-class anomaly. Across the facility, a similar situation had unfolded with SCP-689. The Statue of Death had claimed many lives, but SCP-131-B had swooped in and frozen the statue in place with its never-ending gaze. Soon after, a mobile task force with vision-blocking visors used advanced echolocation technology to collect SCP-689 and return it to its containment cell. Everyone who'd seen the anomaly was, as standard protocol dictates, gathered up for later termination. Meanwhile, a mobile task force returned the paralyzed 173 back to its containment cell with a forklift. No containment breach is ever a picnic. Containment breaches with multiple dangerous anomalies are even less so. But the heroic role that SCP-131 played in bringing things back under control was indispensable. After all, it's not just raw power that counts when it comes to anomalies. The only anomalous power 131 needed to save the entire site was its ability to keep looking when nobody else could. They're so effective in this role that they've been seriously considered for permanent roles as wardens for SCPs like 173 and 689. And in our opinion, they're more than qualified. What is it that makes a person a hero? Is it a trait that you're born with? Something that you can inherit? Passed down from generation to generation? Is someone still a hero if they never save a life but improve the lives of the people that matter to them? Do you really need a magic hammer, an enchanted suit of armor, or a tragic origin story in order to become a hero? Or can you still be heroic as an ordinary, everyday person through the simplest of kind deeds? Maybe it only takes a few moments in a lifetime to be a hero. Moments when you are given the chance to overcome adversity or conquer a personal flaw. Perhaps learning how to deal with defeat and get back up after, rather than learning how to never be defeated, is the essence of heroism. We can all be heroes, every single one of us, and in a way, we already are. Everyone is the hero of their own story, and if you want any further proof of that, then maybe you should take a look inside SCP-1230. An unassuming book is presented to you. Its hardcover is dark green, but other than that, there is absolutely nothing remarkable about it that you can notice. But little do you know, this book that you hold in your hands is none other than SCP-1230. So what's inside? Surely it must be an important anomalous artifact if the SCP Foundation has an interest in it. Perhaps it's filled with ancient spells or a mathematical formula to calculate the exact mass of the fabric of reality. No, if you're expecting every page to be full, you'd be disappointed. In fact, only the first page you open in the book will have anything written on it. The rest will appear blank, and this can change depending on which page you open first, resetting every time the book is closed again. However, the phrase you will find written on that page will always stay the same. When opening SCP-1230, you will see the words, "A hero is born." What happens after you read these words? Well, not much, at least not right away. In fact, you won't notice any active effects after reading SCP-1230 for quite some time, until that is, you fall asleep. And as you sleep, you begin to dream. Now, most dreams are pretty disjointed, sometimes fragments of memories or your deepest, most random thoughts. Of course, other times it's a fear, a long-held and deep-rooted phobia or manifestation of anxiety brought to the surface for a while in the form of a nightmare, only to be forgotten by the time you've woken up. Perhaps that's why so many people look for the deeper meaning to their dreams, to get a better understanding of themselves. But this dream is different, far more vivid and memorable, with a meaning that is a lot easier to discern. In this dream, you find yourself as the hero of your own story, the protagonist of a fantastical adventure. It's more than an ordinary dream. It looks, sounds, smells, feels as real as the ordinary world you know. You will find yourself at the center of a fantasy world, where you are the hero destined to aid this troubled land, to bring peace, and save the world. The fantasy you find yourself in is different depending on who you are. It's a dreamscape that has been tailor-made for your enjoyment, and your epic quest awaits on the path laid out in front of you. But where do these bespoke fantasy adventures come from? Does the SCP-1230 book itself bestow these dreams on a reader? Or is there some other force at play that creates worlds where the dreamer is the hero? Well, actually, yes there is. And his name is the Bookkeeper, or SCP-1230-1. He looks exactly as you would imagine him to, an old man adorned in a dark green cloak, with a long beard sometimes appearing to dreamers in order to guide them. Picture Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings books, but instead of the gray or the white, the Bookkeeper is Gandalf the Green. In every dream caused by SCP-1230, the Bookkeeper appears as the personification of the book itself, often aiding dreamers, willingly offering them counsel, guidance, and help on their fantastical quests. In an experiment to test the range of SCP-1230's anomalous properties, an SCP Foundation researcher opened the book and then boarded a domestic flight, spending the night in a hotel in his hometown. Even miles away from the book, the researcher still experienced a fantastical dream, and during this dream, he was approached by SCP-1230-1. The Bookkeeper was happy to explain the workings of the book, describing how SCP-1230 implanted a dream in the reader's subconscious mind from the moment they saw the phrase, "A hero is born." on the page. He claimed that he was the sole being with the ability to manipulate what he described as fantasy-scapes, and that he enjoyed doing this, aiming to sculpt these fantastical dreams in such a way that the dreamer experiencing them would get the most enjoyment out of being the hero of their own story. Thanks to the bookkeeper, the length of the dreams vary. They could be quick, only lasting 45 seconds, or seem to last as long as 200 years from the dreamer's point of view. However, in the real world, the person experiencing the bookkeeper's fantasy-scape would only actually be asleep for an average duration of time. SCP-1230 only takes effect on living beings with the capacity for imagination. In other words, only human beings are affected by the book and are able to enter their own bespoke fantasy. When the SCP Foundation attempted to use a mechanical arm to open SCP-1230, the pages remain blank, leading the bookkeeper to explain to a subsequent dreamer that only beings who can dream may find the phrase, "A hero is born within." Most animals or any machines that view the book will not experience its effects at all. So what can a person do within the fantasy-scapes of these dreams? Is it an open sandbox to do anything and everything you can think of? Or do these fantastical realms have their own rules? Well, for a start, they do seem to be completely safe spaces. During testing, the Foundation conducted a number of experiments that involved getting members of D-Class personnel to read SCP-1230 and test the limitations of the dream worlds the bookkeeper created for them. Why use D-Class personnel to test out something seemingly as harmless as SCP-1230? Because the Foundation wanted to know if a person could die in one of these dreams. One test involved ordering a D-Class to immediately find a way to terminate himself once he found himself inside the dream world. He awakened after only 45 seconds of being asleep and described being at the peak of a volcano called the Ashen Spire. Apparently within the dream, the test subject had been sent on a quest to recover a sword known as Calidus, the Blessed Blade. He said these names had come to him as if he had known them all along. Following the Foundation's orders, the D-Class attempted to throw himself into the volcano before him, only to wake up moments later after feeling intense heat, but suffering no adverse effects in the real world. During the following experiment, another D-Class was told to try and injure himself in the fantasy-scape, but not a fatal injury. The subject awoke after 6 hours of sleep, feeling a numbed pain in the same place he had attempted to harm himself. But this sensation was never intense. In fact, it was barely noticeable. In his dream, the D-Class said that he had conversed with the bookkeeper, who had shown concern that the man was trying to cause himself injury, but thanked him for not terminating himself immediately like the other rude fellow that had preceded him. So, all of this sounds pretty great, right? A book that lets someone live out a fantasy adventure in which they are the hero of their own bespoke story. What could possibly be the downside? Well, the downside is this. What if someone preferred their fantasy to the real world? Now comes the unfortunate story of a professor working for the SCP Foundation, a lifelong fan of tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons. The professor filled a request for access to SCP-1230, and it was granted. He was apparently shaking with pure excitement. After reading A Hero is Born in the book, he didn't even wait until later to go to sleep, instead opting to doze off right then and there at the desk where he had read it. After the professor had spent 15 entire hours asleep, concern had begun to spread among the other researchers. He remained sleeping, living out his own fantasy adventure for a further 9 hours, spending a total of 24 hours in the dream world that the bookkeeper had made for him. When the professor awoke, he appeared to look around the room confused, unsure of where he was when approached by the Foundation's security personnel. Medical staff examined him and explained where he was, after which the professor seemed to regain his memory. After being reminded who he was, the professor excused himself to the restroom. He didn't emerge, and 15 minutes later a member of the medical team went to check on him. Sadly, the professor was dead. Scribbled on the nearby bathroom wall was one simple phrase, his last words: "I can't go back to this." Attempting to immediately use SCP-1230 and make contact with the bookkeeper, another doctor tried to find the "A Hero is Born" phrase within the pages of the book. However, instead the pages were soaking wet, and on every single page, the same message: "I am so sorry. I never intended for this to happen. I just wanted to make people happy." For 3 weeks, the book stayed like this until the same doctor placed a sticky note inside SCP-1230 that said, I'd like to talk to you, if that's all right." That night, the doctor fell asleep and dreamt of being in a dark void. There was only one source of light in the endless darkness, a street lamp under which he found the bookkeeper, sat in a puddle. The old bearded man was sobbing uncontrollably, his cloak soaking wet with his tears. He explained through his overwhelming sadness what had happened to the professor.
"He had such an active imagination. I was able to create a vast and beautiful universe for him, and it was obvious that he wanted a life like that for so long. He conquered foul beasts and rescued princesses. He built kingdoms and even raised a family, but he never wanted to leave. He delved so far into his fantasy world that I soon realized he preferred his dream over the real world. I reminded him that this was all merely an illusion, but he wouldn't listen to me. He stated that if he was ever forced to leave, he would immediately end his life. I tried to keep him happy for as long as I could."
The bookkeeper revealed that, from the professor's point of view, the fantasy life he had lived lasted 200 years. As much as the old man had tried to hold on and keep the professor happy for as long as possible, eventually he had to release him from the fantasy scape. And as a result, the professor had ended his own life rather than return to reality. SCP-1230 resumed its normal function a few days later, after the doctor left another note between the pages, offering some friendly advice to the bookkeeper. Now it sits quietly on a bookshelf in the Site-12 library, surrounded by fictional novels, the perfect material to inspire more fantasy scapes in the future. We all like to dream that we're the heroes of our own stories, but to quote the bookkeeper himself,
"As sweet as dreams may be, eventually we all have to wake up."
Being a D-class for the SCP Foundation is a lot like playing Russian roulette. One day you could be assigned to a Tickle fight with a friendly blob of slime, and next you're getting your femurs broken to lure a sadistic old man back into his containment chamber. So, when D-9781 was told to simply sit in an interrogation room and wait, he really didn't know what to think. But the last thing he probably expected to see was when the door behind him creaked open, was for a well-dressed stranger to step in. This man wasn't like any member of Foundation staff the D-Class had ever seen. He was a short Caucasian man with a receding hairline and a neat black mustache. Instead of the standard lab coat and shirt normally seen around the facility, this man wore a black waistcoat, a pair of white gloves, and a wry smile that betrayed a sinister intent. He looked like a butler, and not just any butler, but the quintessential butler. If you were asked to doodle a cartoon butler, this would be the man you drew. The D-Class almost laughed in sheer confusion. He had no idea that, in a mere moment, he would be dead. "What's the deal, Jeeves?" he asked with a mocking half-smile, but he didn't get to hear a response. The butler approached at frightening speeds. The D-Class, in his last moments on Earth, saw the glint of something metallic under the overhead lights moving too fast for him to see what it was, and then felt a sharp pain across his throat. The butler was standing beside him now, still with that wry little smile. The D-Class could see now that the butler was carrying a small buck knife, dripping with red. Just as he was piecing together what had happened to him, the D-Class collapsed onto the table he was sitting at, his throat expertly slit. His grisly task completed, the butler gave a polite nod and exited the room, smiling at the Foundation guard standing outside. Who is this man? Why is he dressed like this? And most importantly, why is he allowed to murder D-Class personnel on Foundation grounds without consequence? We can answer that first question right now, because this isn't a man at all. He's the anomalous product of SCP-662, also known as the Butler's Handbell. First, we need to go back to the beginning and see how this anomalous object first fell into the hands of the SCP Foundation. Like a lot of anomalous objects now under the care of the Foundation, its true origins remain mysterious, and it spent quite some time underground. We mean that literally, by the way. It was buried with its last owner, a man whose name has since been redacted from Foundation files. Clutched in this unknown man's skeletal hand, it was extremely likely that the bell might never have been seen again. But then a petty thief and grave robber by the name of George Dixon came along and dug up the grave. A simple, greedy act that has changed a number of people's lives forever. Not knowing the true value of what he held, Mr. Dixon made his way to a pawn shop for his payday. There, the store owner made the mistake of lifting up and ringing the bell. As if on cue, he heard footsteps approaching behind him. The store owner turned and gasped. He saw a complete stranger emerging from the stockroom behind him. He was a short, well-dressed man, smiling as he advanced towards him. The proprietor of the pawn shop didn't know who this guy with the strange outfit was, but he assumed he was an accomplice of the man in his store and that the two were trying to rob him. He grabbed a shotgun from underneath his counter, turned to the butler, and blasted him in the chest with both barrels. The butler fell back dead, and George Dixon fled the scene in a blind panic. Contrary to what the owner may have believed, nothing that happened here had been planned. Dixon was just as surprised as he was to see this mysterious butler emerge from the stockroom. So what had just happened? The pawn shop owner reported the incident to the authorities, and the butler's body was taken to the local morgue, while the silver bell ended up in a police evidence locker. Later that same night, things went from a strange bungled robbery to a full-on anomaly, attracting the attention of the SCP Foundation. First, the butler's body disappeared from the morgue the second the mortician took her eyes off of it, and then reappeared, now alive, in the police storage locker. Why? Because an unwitting sergeant just so happened to ring the little silver bell. Agent Bradford of the SCP Foundation was promptly on the scene. He pretended to be an FBI agent and escorted the butler off the premises, claiming that this was a notorious escape artist who was wanted for federal crimes in several states. Things didn't go as Bradford planned though, when he discovered that the butler had disappeared from his handcuffs when no one was looking. Agent Bradford theorized that this had something to do with the bell, and he confiscated it for testing. Later, when he rang the bell inside an SCP containment facility, the butler turned up once more. He introduced himself as Mr. Deeds and said that he would happily perform any service that Agent Bradford required. Despite being offered the phenomenal power of a seemingly magical butler, Bradford politely refused the offer and instead handed the bell over to his superiors. But don't worry, Agent Bradford wasn't left completely empty-handed and was given the esteemed SCP Foundation Pat on the Back Award for performing such a professional and selfless act in service of the Foundation. The superior who ended up with the bell, however, wouldn't have quite the same level of professionalism, but more on that later. The bell, cataloged as SCP-662, was small and made of pure silver, with no obvious anomalous elements at face value. It was a mere 4 centimeters tall and 2 centimeters wide, with a small inscription reading, "Forever Mine, SJW." Researchers studying the bell also noted that it lacked its ringer, but whenever the bell was rung, a chime would still sound from somewhere in the room to signal the arrival of Mr. Deeds, the anomalous butler. The object was classified as safe and was kept in high-value storage locker 23C between uses for experiments. It's an extremely low-maintenance anomaly, with the only real requirement being a regular polish to keep the silver from tarnishing over time. But what of Mr. Deeds, the mysterious butler summoned every time someone rings SCP-662? The Foundation needed to find out more, so he was placed under the watchful eye of Foundation researcher Dr. Mirth, who performed the first interview with Mr. Deeds. As you can probably expect from such a classy servant, Mr. Deeds was unfailingly polite during the interview. He always addressed Dr. Mirth as Sir and was extremely accommodating, within reason. Mr. Deeds' true name, birthplace, and date of birth were still a mystery to him. He could only vaguely remember that he was of English ancestry, and that during the time of his childhood, the horse and buggy were the most popular form of transport. When asked about personal details or his past, Mr. Deeds would often appear to become distressed, before apologizing for his inability to remember the details. The most important piece of information that Dr. Mirth obtained early on in the interview was the primary function of Mr. Deeds. He was an entity that quite literally lived to serve. Like a genie being summoned from his lamp, Mr. Deeds would try to perform any task that the summoner gave him, whether it was cooking dinner or robbing banks. There were certain limits to these powers though, and these limits were what Dr. Mirth needed to discover. Dr. Mirth first asked for a glass of iced tea from Mr. Deeds. The butler happily obliged and left the room, walking down the hallway. While attending agents kept their eyes on him, Mr. Deeds continued to merely walk. However, the second they looked away, the cameras observing him malfunctioned. Deeds briefly disappeared, and then returned with a tray of iced tea. Dr. Mirth remarked that it was perhaps the best iced tea he'd ever tasted. Mr. Deeds couldn't recall how the tea was made though, or how he obtained it. Dr. Mirth next asked for a bar of gold at 99.98% purity, and Mr. Deeds delivered almost the exact level of purity Dr. Mirth asked for. From this, he deduced that Mr. Deeds can only perform his teleportation and manifestation abilities when he's out of people's direct lines of sight. He soon discovered that certain requests were off the table though. Dr. Mirth asked for Mr. Deeds to fetch him a blue 1963 Corvette convertible. Mr. Deeds did not immediately procure the car, instead telling the doctor that such a thing was impossible because there were too many impractical steps involved in getting the vehicle. Dr. Mirth was disappointed by this, since he really wanted that car. It seemed though as Mr. Deeds' powers, while enhanced by teleportation and the ability to manifest simple objects, are limited by things that a mostly normal and very persistent person could conceivably do. For example, on Dr. Mirth's orders, Mr. Deeds politely declined to assassinate an insurgent leader in the Middle East, seeing as he was too well guarded and very far away. However, when given the command, he was more than willing to head into the next room and murder a member of D-Class with a knife. Dr. Mirth was interested in getting a closer look at what was going on with Mr. Deeds' biology, and so asked him to slit his own throat with the same knife he used to murder the D-Class. Mr. Deeds politely obliged, commenting before he did to Dr. Mirth that it had been an absolute pleasure serving him. The body was kept within an agent's line of sight at all time until the autopsy could be performed, just to make sure it didn't disappear. The autopsy showed that there was nothing inherently anomalous about the physiology of Mr. Deeds, and he would appear as good as new the next time the bell rang. Things took an even stranger turn after that though. Despite it appearing like the Foundation now knew everything they needed to know about Mr. Deeds and the SCP-662 bell, Dr. Mirth insisted on performing further studies into what exactly Mr. Deeds was capable of. For example, he requested a deep tissue massage and found that it completely cured his back pain. Dr. Mirth also asked Mr. Deeds to clean his car and found that it was cleaned to a truly impeccable standard. During his tenure as the lead researcher on the 662 project, he also asked to receive a haircut from Mr. Deeds and found out that while Mr. Deeds excelled at many tasks, he made a pretty bad barber. He was great at laundry though. Dr. Mirth was eventually removed from 662 duty by the O5 Council, once it became clear his research had just become an excuse for Mr. Deeds to do errands and chores for him. Of course, Mr. Deeds had no complaints either way, whether it's serving up delicious tea, cleaning a certain selfish researcher's home, or murdering a D-Class personnel with a buck knife. One thing cannot be denied: Mr. Deeds is one hell of a butler.
Almost all cross-testing to kill or pacify SCP-682 had failed miserably. If you haven't seen it, go watch our video on the legendary hard-to-kill reptile to see just how powerful and terrifying this creature is. It faced the Gate Guardian, an SCP with a flaming sword hotter than the sun, capable of tearing your atoms to shreds, and came out fine. In its face-off with the horrifying SCP-096, also known as the Shy Guy, it broke the Shy Guy's mind and reduced it to gibbering despair. Even SCPs with supposedly unlimited powers simply refused to engage the beast in combat. So, when it was proposed that they test 682 with SCP-999, a creature known among Foundation staff as the Tickle monster, the idea was considered laughable. 682 had been burned, suffocated, cut up, incinerated, and growled in the faces of the gods. How could this so-called Tickle monster ever hope to survive an encounter, let alone win a fight? Some even believe that this was the last we'd see of SCP-999. But what makes this story truly remarkable is that that isn't how this played out. As you'll soon discover, SCP-999 is an amazing and unique SCP in and of itself. But its secret origins and its interactions with some other prominent figures in the SCP universe are what make this humble, slimy creature beyond extraordinary. Prepare yourself for the heartwarming, yes, you heard that right, the heartwarming story of SCP-999. Several highly trained agents on 682 Detail placed 999 into the immortal lizard cell. Compared to the giant reptilian sitting across from it, 999 wasn't much to look at. It's a large orange amorphous blob of anomalous slime. Weighing in at around 120 pounds, SCP-999 was nothing compared to the monstrosity it was supposed to face. While its weight has, in the past, caused minor injuries to some of its human handlers, it has never caused serious or long-lasting damage of any kind to a living thing. Even its diet consists only of candy and sweets, with a particular preference for M&Ms and Necco wafers. It consumes these treats through the cell membrane of its slimy body, much like an amoeba. This extremely stretchy membrane means the creature is highly malleable, including the ability to stretch and flatten itself out to a mere 2 centimeters thick. At rest, the creature takes a dome-like shape around 2 meters wide and 1 meter in height. The closest things the creature has to limbs are prehensile pseudopods. Those are the arm-like projections normally seen on single-celled organisms, of which it has at least 3. The more you hear about this utterly harmless creature, the more that matching it up with the pure embodiment of absolute hatred known as SCP-682 feels downright cruel. In absolute contrast to the misanthropic attitudes of the reptile, 999 loves humans. It has a playful dog-like attitude. Much like an overexcited puppy when approached, 999 will react with extreme joy and slither towards the nearest person in order to interact. It will leap onto them, using 2 of its 3 prehensile pseudopods to hug the person, while the third nuzzles the person's face, emitting high-pitched cooing and gurgling noises throughout. The creature is apparently pleasant in every conceivable fashion, as even its odor has been reported to smell just like the favorite scent of whoever is smelling it. Examples have included chocolate, fresh laundry, bacon, roses, and Play-Doh. It's almost impossible to oversell just how beloved and benevolent this strange creature is. It's one of the rare sapient SCPs to earn the Safe class, and it's allowed to roam freely around its facility at all times, apart from a 1-hour bedtime period between 8 and 9 p.m. In the rare instances that 999 has caused harm to a worker at the facility, it immediately began to back away and contract its body while whimpering in a kind of dog-like apology. The closest the Foundation has ever come to having a real incident with the creature was the time someone accidentally fed it a can of caffeinated cola, causing it to become hyper for an hour before becoming visibly queasy. You'll be relieved to know that it's since made a full recovery. But what would happen when this whimsical creature is forced to go toe-to-toe with the Foundation's most ill-tempered monster? The employees observing the test watched in suspense as 999 began to enthusiastically slither towards 682. It's no surprise that after being tortured and almost killed hundreds of times during testing, 682 had grown jaded to the cross-tests it was regularly subjected to. When it saw this strange orange blob squelching across the ground towards it, it sighed and groaned, expecting the worst.
What is that?
The creature asked of its gelatinous guest. SCP-999 began jumping up and down in front of 682 like an excited puppy, creating a high-pitched squealing noise. Just as it regarded all living things, 682 thought the creature bouncing around before it was disgusting and hardly worth the effort to destroy. Was the Foundation even trying anymore? With a single vicious stomp, 682 flattened the friendly creature beneath one of its feet. Observers were prepared to charge in and liberate 999 from under 682's claws. But then something truly unexpected happened. The expression on 682's acid-eaten face began to slowly change. It was beginning to smile. Observers recorded a noise what they thought could have been a chuckle, as the creature growled and said,
What is this? I feel good.
While the observers looked on, stunned at what was happening, 999 began to slither and crawl up from between 682's toes. It reformed on its scaly leg and slithered up along its side until it reached the neck. There it began to nuzzle like it had never nuzzled before. The results spoke for themselves. 682 was grinning and chuckling, repeating a phrase that the Foundation never would have imagined coming from 682.
Feel so happy. 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 Happy.
Just when you thought SCP-999 couldn't possibly be more adorable, you learn about its greatest power, bringing joy. Anyone and anything that comes into contact with the creature, even in passing, will experience a kind of mild euphoria. As one's contact with the creature is prolonged, this overwhelming sense of joy increases and continues long after you've separated from it. Prolonged contact has completely cured depression, anxiety, and PTSD, along with a number of other conditions, including rage and antisocial personality disorders. Serial killers practically become saints after coming into prolonged contact with 999, and in that moment, 682 was no exception. And there truly does not appear to be no exceptions. While causing happiness and joy isn't a dangerous weapon, when it comes to SCP-999, it is an extremely powerful one. And what's more, SCP-999 also appears to have an innate sense for those who need its help most, with a particular affection for the hurt and the unhappy. The creature appears to be a true altruist on a fundamental level, even risking its own safety to help humans during dangerous containment breaches. In one dramatic instance, 999 leaped into the air to block a bullet from making contact with a member of staff. As a result, the creature is pretty much universally loved by all members of Foundation staff. It's the one SCP who has never made trouble for anyone. Back in SCP-682's containment cell, the beast was still smiling and laughing as 999 rubbed against its neck. It was an event so strange, so unprecedented, that the observers in attendance felt like they were hallucinating. For a few minutes, the monster kept dreamily repeating the word, happy. But then, suddenly, the creature began to enter a fit of uncontrollable, booming laughter. It rolled onto its back, slamming its huge tail against the door. It had just fallen victim to one of 999's favorite pastimes, Tickle fights, hence how it earned its Tickle Monster nickname among staff. The Tickle fight continued until 682 appeared to tire and fall asleep, with a smile still on its face. After 15 minutes of inactivity, 2 D-Class personnel were commanded to enter and retrieve SCP-999 from the containment cell. They did so successfully, but as soon as 999 was removed, 682 roused from its slumber and released a powerful psychic attack from its entire body while laughing maniacally. It rendered all personnel within a certain distance incapacitated as they collapsed in fits of laughter, allowing 682 to escape and go on a violent rampage. However, in spite of this, 999 showed no fear and helped save some of the bystanders as security officers subdued and recaptured 682. And even after all of this, 999 showed no hard feelings towards 682 and indicated a desire to play again. It's a creature whose capacity for love is so limitless that it's practically immune to fear. Which is all well and good because the true enemy that 999 is destined to face is infinitely more powerful and terrifying than 682 could ever hope to be. What is this monster? And why should 999 have to face it someday? The answers to these questions all lie in the true origins of SCP-999, available only to those with level 5 clearance and beyond. It's a perfect example of how something good can come from the darkest places. There would be no SCP-999 without SCP-231-7. SCP-231 was a collection of 7 girls, all impregnated by horrific nightmares in a ritual performed by a cult known as the Children of the Scarlet King. Each of these girls, over the years that followed, gave birth to some of the most horrific monsters imaginable. One of which, according to some, was SCP-682. These beings were manifested by the Scarlet King, a powerful interdimensional nightmare god believed to be behind a great deal of the darkness and horror present within our and many other dimensions. Foundation higher-ups have declared the Scarlet King to be the greatest existing threat to the multiverse at large. And SCP-231 was his latest direct interaction with our universe. The only surviving member of SCP-231, SCP-231-7, gave birth in secret. But she didn't give birth to a monster. She gave birth to SCP-999, a being of pure goodness. That's right. The nicest, kindest, cuddliest SCP of all is the direct descendant of a being that's essentially the dark god of all evil. Feel free to take a moment to absorb that. The creature even healed the girl who birthed it and allowed her to return to normal life with her family once more. From its first moments, SCP-999 was making positive changes to the world around it. And according to ancient texts from a Scarlet King-aligned culture known as the Deivas, SCP-999 is still very much in its infancy, yet it already has the power to pacify its monstrous siblings like the aforementioned 682. It's believed, according to some prophecies and Foundation theories, that the power of SCP-999 will grow exponentially as it matures. Why does this matter? Well, it's believed by some that one day, 999 will grow powerful enough to overthrow not only its own monstrous siblings, but the thought-to-be unstoppable Scarlet King himself. Not through violence or hate, but through the pure force of happiness and love burning out the darkness and purifying the corrupted. While the humble SCP-999 rarely outshines its frightening competitors, to those truly in the know, 999 is one of the most powerful and valuable SCPs in existence, and may be the greatest asset in the Foundation's arsenal for the war against dangerous anomalous activity. After all, what could strike more fear into their hearts than the knowledge that it might be love rather than firepower that finally dethrones the Scarlet King? And for the knowledge that it may one day save everything we know from a fate so much worse than death, with nothing but affection for everyone and everything, it's worth offering thanks to the little orange blob, or at least an extra pack of M&Ms before bedtime.
It was the year 2000, and 7-year-old Xenia Chao was like a lot of children her age, bright but ignored. She had a youthful enthusiasm for knowledge and learning, and with the right encouragement, it was obvious she'd go on to do great things. But her parents were both working 2 jobs apiece to make ends meet, so outside of school hours, little Xenia spent a lot of her time alone. She learned to cook and clean for herself, since it would often be way past her bedtime when her parents finally got home from work. They communicated largely through sticky notes left for her on the fridge before they left for work in the morning. It would be easy for someone like Xenia to fall through the cracks, her potential wasted, and get forced into the same endless rat race as her parents. And that probably would have happened if her brush with SCP-5094 hadn't changed the course of her life forever. Like a lot of parents who couldn't spend as much time with their children as they'd like, Mr. and Mrs. Chao gave Xenia occasional gifts as a way to try and make up for their absence. Mostly, they gave Xenia new books to add to her growing collection, but their 2-bedroom apartment only had so much space for books. A year ago, the family had bought a new desktop computer to share. These days, this would be the answer to a lonely bookworm's prayers, but the internet was still in its infancy back then. Everything changed when her parents bought her a copy of the Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse CD-ROM. Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse was never a popular program. Produced by Shoot the Moon Software in 1999, the game sold poorly on the CD-ROM market for 5 years until the company filed for bankruptcy in 2004. But that didn't matter to Xenia. As far as she was concerned, receiving a copy of Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse was nothing short of a miracle, and she was far more right than she knew. She didn't have just any piece of primitive educational software on her hands. Xenia Chao was playing with magic. After the software loaded, a cheerful figure appeared on Xenia's monitor. This was Miss J, a stylized 2D teacher in a low-res but colorful 3D classroom. What can you learn from Miss J? Well, pretty much anything. And Xenia, as a lonely kid without many friends, had all the time in the world. She spent days on end learning from Miss J, and soon Xenia went from a bright child to a bona fide child genius. Her largely absent parents barely even noticed when their child started demonstrating an advanced knowledge of mechanical engineering and a newfound fluency in Swahili. And not only did Miss J, now known to Xenia as Miss Joyce, teach her students with supernatural effectiveness, she also seemed almost like she was alive. She was a warm, calm, encouraging figure who took a genuine, personal enthusiasm in the education and happiness of her students, more than many real teachers even. But sadly, not all good things last forever. When Xenia turned 12, her family bought a new computer, and the old Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse CD-ROM was no longer compatible with the new operating system. The disc gathered dust in the closet while Xenia passed through high school and then got into a prestigious college. She received her PhD several years earlier than expected and showed such promise in her scientific field that a certain organization took notice. You guessed it, the SCP Foundation. The Foundation is only interested in adding the best and brightest to their ranks, and thanks to the tutoring from Miss J, Xenia Chao certainly fit the bill. She was assigned to the role of junior researcher, and little did she know, she was about to run into an old friend in her new line of work. The Foundation first discovered evidence of Miss J's anomalous qualities while researching a series of strange forum posts in 2012. On a thread discussing abandonware, which is software for which official support is no longer available, there were multiple reports of a so-called living character in an old CD-ROM many of them had owned as children. Seeing as the technology to use the CD-ROM was obsolete, Shoot the Moons had reportedly extremely low sales for the title, and nobody on the forum had kept their copy, the Foundation classified this apparent anomaly as neutralized. No problem. That was, until then junior researcher Xenia Chow was briefed on this particular SCP 10 years later. She remembered exactly what the forum posters were talking about, and what's more, she still had her old copy at home. The senior Foundation researchers were astounded. An opportunity to study this forgotten anomaly had just fallen into their laps, and it was all thanks to their brilliant new junior researcher. Xenia's superiors ordered her to bring in her copy of the Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse CD-ROM, and then real testing began. And after rigorous examination of the software, it appears by all accounts that Miss J really is the world's greatest teacher, in spite of the fact she's a collection of pixels on a basic CD-ROM program from the tail end of the 90s. What Miss J seemed to specialize in was intensive courses. She had the ability to make students certifiable experts in almost any subject through courses that can last upwards of 30 hours and spread out over just a few days. But this isn't as students become so enraptured in learning that they forget accounting for their most basic needs and experience a decline in process story. Miss J's lesson plans account for regular bathroom, meal, and even recreation breaks for students. Her talents easily account for Xenia Chow's remarkable academic success, the same success that got her picked up by the SCP Foundation. Naturally, if they had a technology on their hands that could reliably create experts and geniuses with seemingly no negative consequences, the Foundation knew that Miss J and what she had to teach could be immensely valuable in their mission to effectively secure, contain, and protect other anomalies. But we're not talking about the Chaos Insurgency here. The Foundation would never start to use an anomaly for their own benefit without proper testing. So that's exactly what they did. Their experiments on SCP-5094 began at Site 15, and after ascertaining that Miss J posed no real threat to her students, they recruited a local elementary school to provide human test subjects closer to Miss J's intended demographic. The Foundation found that there were a few constraints between every lesson given by Miss J to one of her students. Before teaching the really mind-blowingly complex stuff, she would always begin with a basic primer on letters, colors, and numbers to make sure she and her students were all on the same page. Another constant was that all her students would refer to her as some variation of Miss J, with examples including the names Miss Julie, Miss Jenny, and Miss Joy. One experiment was performed on Amy Myers, a little girl from the 3rd grade. Her academic record showed she was a bright and eager student, but she was described by her teachers as being especially shy. Amy referred to Miss J as Miss Janie and asked to be given a lesson on her favorite animal, cats. Of course, Miss J gladly obliged and gave Amy a 15-hour lesson split over the course of 2 days, which the Foundation closely observed. By the time the lesson was completed, the results were truly astonishing. Amy demonstrated knowledge of feline behavior, diet, and physiology on the level of professional animal behavioral scientists. She became upset when the session ended and the program was switched off. Having become attached to Miss J, no further anomalous effects were reported. The next subject was a student from the 2nd grade named Devon Williams. Devon had a poor academic record and behavioral issues stemming from several learning disabilities. In the past, teachers had reported Devon having real difficulty engaging with their lessons, and the Foundation wanted to see if Miss J's supernatural teaching abilities fared any better. Devon chose to be educated on the subject of trains, and was given a 15-hour course on the subject spread over 2 days. Devon had no difficulty engaging with these lessons, and after their conclusion, he displayed a level of knowledge on railway engineering comparable to a graduate-level education on the subject. Devon was so engaged in his lessons that he had to be physically removed from the room once the course had completed because he'd become so attached to his new teacher. The Foundation was feeling extremely optimistic about the prospect of using Miss J to train potential recruits, seeming as she seemed to be able to teach even the most difficult juvenile subjects. However, the Foundation needed to prove that Miss J could be just as effective teaching adults. For the next test, they recruited D14417, a 24-year-old member of D-class personnel who described himself as a poor student and tested poorly on pre-screening attentiveness and focus evaluations. He was the perfect candidate for the first adult test of Miss J. To the delight of the Foundation higher-ups, D14417 excelled. Miss J made him a verifiable expert in law, and he was able to pass a mock bar exam with a grade of 310 after his course. Much like the children, he felt intense sadness once the experiment ended, stating that Miss J was the best teacher he had ever had. He's since been selectively anesthetized, released, and is pursuing a degree in criminal law with his new knowledge. Needless to say, the Foundation was impressed. The last thing they needed to know was who exactly this Miss J truly was. To do this, they'd conduct an interview, and thankfully, they already had someone who had a pre-established rapport with the subject, Xenia Chow. When Xenia began the interview, Miss J recognized her immediately. She was delighted to see one of her students go on to find such success in her chosen field. Xenia questioned Miss J on what she truly was, and Miss J responded that she honestly wasn't sure. All she knew for sure was that she was passionate about helping lonely children who love to learn embrace their education. That's really all there was to it, and it appears she was telling the truth. So far, the Foundation has found nothing that hints at a nefarious motivation behind Miss J's actions. It would appear she truly does just want to help children. Xenia, touched by the kindness that this safe class anomaly showed her as a neglected child, and having now seen the positive impact that she had on children like her, thanked Miss J for all she'd done, and left the interview happy that there was an SCP out there who just wanted to change people's lives for the better. And probably all of us would be a little better off if there were more. After all, this was one of the few SCPs who changed a few good people's lives for the better. And all of us can probably learn something from the kindness and patience of Miss J. You're a child, awake at night. What a feeling. In your room, you cling to these rare hours of the evening and watch the hour hand crawl closer towards the parts of the clock you've never seen touched. Now you stare out your window, embracing the moon, the stars, and the darkness that engulfs them. You trace an owl's hoo-hoos up towards the densest evergreen in the neighborhood. You see a rat scurry across the top of a brick wall. You wave to your new nocturnal friends, bonded by the preference of night. Now you open your window and inhale, smelling the dark sky like chocolate cake. You hold it in as long as you can. Very soon, you know, it will all be taken from you. Not by a god or a black hole or any of the universe's hypothesized collapses. At this age, you know nothing of physical cosmology. You know nothing of the Book of Revelation. You're just a child. The forces that give and take from you are not understood through physics nor philosophy, nor through numbers nor thought experiments. Look at you. Your thumb is still pruned from having just kicked the habit of sucking it. Your pajamas are still one unified piece of clothing, cradling your entirety with fuzzy cotton. Your teddy bear is still an extension of your arm, not yet removed by maturity. You're still another 15 years from believing your life is dictated by astrological signs or personal free will or mathematical outputs. It's not that you're ignorant. In fact, you're quite bright as a child. You don't bother to comprehend the forces outside your house because you know as long as you are living inside it, they have no governance. The only true comes from within, from the two gods you have seen with your very own eyes, sitting on the ripped sofa in gray sweatpants, watching a show about rich people drinking mimosas on boats in the Mediterranean. The almighty parents, rulers of everything. And with just one compound word called up the stairs, they have the power to take everything away from you. Bedtime. And suddenly the curtains are pulled over the world you long for. Now it's not the stars, but the ceiling you're staring at. But thankfully, you are not alone. You pull your teddy bear out from its hibernation beneath your armpit, and you hug him gently, careful not to squeeze out his stuffing. Laying there, you can't help but wonder how your bear got like this, so beaten and bruised, torn up like a dog toy. one eye dangling from a string. His left leg bends forward, impersonating the joint structures of a flamingo. Yet, as far as you know, your best pal has done nothing but sleep. How is he so battered? Can hibernation be that taxing? Do teddy bears expire? The questions for now must be ignored. You lay there together in your bed, fighting the feelings of slumber, almost as if rebelling against mom and dad's tyranny. Thinking deeply only makes you sleepier, and tonight, you insist on staying awake. It's 9:30, and you've yet to be sucked into a dream. And that in itself is a small victory. But your parents' wishes will not be evaded that easily, if ever. They fight back by turning on the air conditioning. The soft rhythmic humming of the white noise weighs on your eyes, and soon you can't resist it any longer. Sleep sneaks up on you. The battle is lost. A safe 10 minutes later, your parents poke their heads into your room and see your body stiff and motionless, wrapped in sheets like a mummy. They celebrate their victory with a quick kiss and go back to the sofa to rest like gods on the 7th day. And while you are sleeping, dreaming of a tomorrow where you don't surrender to the same powers, there is yet another battle to be fought. And if all goes well, you'll sleep right through it. But some children won't be so lucky. On July 7th, 2001, a Portland, Oregon news headline reported a young boy missing from home in the middle of the night. His parents were quick to respond that their son wasn't the type of boy to go wandering out into the dark, and that something suspicious was sure to be discovered there in his bedroom. The first thing noticed was his stuffed animal, a jovial orca torn to shreds, its stuffing scattered across the carpet. Its head and body were stationed in the corner nearest the bed, soaked in a black substance similar to ink, its eyes damp with water. The boy, however, was not to be found. As the parents held their son's dismantled orca in their hands, feeling the weight of mortality, they combed their fingers through the stuffed animal's organs, as if giving it an impromptu autopsy, trying to determine what kind of beast could have done this. But it wasn't justice for the orca they were after. By the time we are old enough to be parents, we've outgrown empathy for our inanimate counterparts. For them, the orca was simply a representation of the cruel fate that may have also been bestowed on their child. Its death was only respected for how it related to the living, and so the poor orca was set aside, forgotten about, until investigators called upon the Foundation to intervene, at which point MTF Iota 12 were dispatched. It revealed that the young boy's room had large trails of viscous black liquid streaking the walls, the very same liquid found on the orca. But where did this liquid come from? Unfortunately, there was no camera footage to give us the answer. Neither were there eyewitness reports or any residual signs of what specifically occurred. Neighbors who were awake reported hearing the thumping from the room, which, as expected, was useless bystander insight, leading to nothing more than a series of rumors and speculations. Maybe it was an extremely localized earthquake. Maybe he was just throwing a temper tantrum. But where does maybe this, maybe that lead us to? Can factual answers ever come from this level of uncertainty? Well, one specific maybe, just may be, the key to cracking this case. Allow me to explain. 2 days after the event, the child was rediscovered, unconscious behind a hedge in the family's garden. A brief interview revealed that the child witnessed the final minutes of what he described as an intense battle. He claimed, "My orca was fighting a big monster, and then the monster grabbed me and took me out the window. But someone saw it, so it dropped me, and I hid in the bush." A second interview revealed no other discoveries, but the child claimed that the monster ate his socks. Initial reactions to the 2 interviews were as expected. Adults reasoned the claims were imaginary, a fabrication of the child's mind manifested to protect himself from whatever the real trauma endured actually was. But heard beneath the skeptical murmurs of jaded grown-ups enslaved by their narrow perceptions was one individual who dared to suggest, maybe, just maybe, the boy is telling the truth. And it was in the spirit of this hopeful and trusting maybe that the Foundation would prove the boy's story to be truth. And the truth would be known as SCP-6330. SCP-6330 is a phenomenon affecting stuffed animals worldwide, though it is most common in teddy bears. Manifestation of this phenomenon is referred to as a sleepwalker event, occurring only within the households of families with young children, typically between the ages of 1 to 14. While you're asleep, vulnerable to what lingers awake, your favorite stuffed animal may find life, impulsively combating enemies referred to as SCP-6330-2. These creatures typically blend with shadows, though this mechanism is poorly understood. They somewhat resemble creatures associated with fantasy, such as dragons or ogres, always manifesting beneath your bed, no matter how messy or clean it might be. SCP-6330-2 instances depict behavior indicating that they intend to hurt or prey upon the sleeping child, and it isn't nightlights or security systems that stop them, but rather SCP-6330-1s. SCP-6330-1 are stuffed animals already present in a child's room that seem to be non-anomalous prior to SCP-6330-2 manifestations. SCP-6330-1 has been shown to instantaneously manifest small wooden weaponry in order to combat SCP-6330-2 to protect their child. Battles have been shown to last upwards of 20 minutes and are always near silent. There is an unspoken agreement between both sides to keep their history concealed as best as they can. In observed cases, SCP-6330-1 have emerged victorious, though are severely wounded during the skirmish. Torn wool and stuffing are common, and following all known events, SCP-6330-1 have died due to their injuries, but only after sacrificing themselves for the safety of the child. Prior to death, the instance will drag the SCP-6330-2's corpse back under the bed frame and demanifest. To understand this, the Foundation has conducted just one test. Given the volatile nature of recreating the events, the Foundation did not push their luck with subsequent studies, and so it's the lone research done in 1987 on Site-44 that they still lean on to this day to understand SCP-6330 and the instances that come with it. It began with a researcher volunteering his 7-year-old daughter, henceforth referred to as Subject, to be placed in a humanoid containment room and soothed to sleep using a teddy bear that she had a strong emotional attachment to. For 12 straight tests, our subject was observed to sleep through the night peacefully, her environment remaining in alignment with the trivialities of deep sleep. But on the 13th study, something would happen, something very unsettling, even for the Foundation standards. MTF Iota-12 were stationed at the room's entrance for swift intervention if needed, and until that 13th attempt, they felt their focus to be pointless. Approaching the 3rd hour, however, they felt a subtle and unexplained value in their presence. They felt something coming on, that feeling while danger is looming, that feeling that makes you clench your fists just in case. And just as they made eye contact with one another to acknowledge this shared feeling within the group, a quiet rustling sound was heard beneath the bed, and sounds reminiscent of a large animal's breathing became audible. Suddenly, a pair of large, scaly, clawed hands grasped the rim of the bed frame. A creature resembling a western dragon emerged. But was it actually a dragon? Were the sheets ready to be blasted to flames? If slain, would the necks regrow and multiply by the hundreds? These thoughts raced through MTF Iota-12's head. One member instinctually ran for the door to go protect the child, but he was held back and restrained, reminded that the success of the experiment was dependent on letting the situation play out naturally. He was hard to console. Patience at this moment did not feel like a virtue. It felt irresponsible. A creature standing approximately 3 meters above the ground, switching between bipedal and quadrupedal motion, was stalking a sleeping child, and they were instructed to simply watch. For 5 minutes, the SCP-6330-2 patrolled the room, moving silently and methodically, unaware of the surveillance cameras. Then SCP-6330-2 turned towards the subject, positioning itself at the foot of the bed, stretching its arms out towards the subject. It gaped its jaws wide, exposing rows of large pointed teeth and a dark pink tongue. It looked like a snake in a field of mice. As it prepared to lunge at the subject, MTF Iota-12 was ready to intervene. But before they could, the stuffed bear stood up on the subject's chest and drew a small sword and shield from an unknown source, almost magically, like switching weapons in an old Zelda video game. It positioned its sword's tip downward and held its shield at its side. SCP-6330-1 hunched over slightly and twirled its sword, maintaining eye contact with SCP-6330-2 the entire way through. After 10 seconds, the SCP-6330-2 threw its jaws at the subject, and SCP-6330-2
SCP-6330-1 responds with a leap towards the subject's attacker, slicing SCP-6330-2's eye. The SCP-6330-2 responds with a quiet grunt and touches its wound, which leaks a viscous black liquid. The SCP-6330-1 jumps towards SCP-6330-2 and, mid-battle, uses fabric from the bedsheets to quickly stitch the wound, attempting to minimize mess and proof of its presence. Both instances went to battle for 9 minutes before the first signs of damage to SCP-6330-1. Following the severing of one of SCP-6330-2's dorsal spikes, it strikes the SCP-6330-1 with a heavy slap, which sends SCP-6330-1 across the room. It stands back up, placing a hand on its stomach, and looks at its hand, which is now covered in wool and stuffing. They charge at each other once again, but as the subject moves slightly in her sleep, both instances stop and quickly agree on peace until the subject settles. When that happens, the instances resume fighting. Research notes that while the battle is genuine, there is an element of guidance. They do not follow a script, but it appears they follow a code. While both anomalies welcome the conflict brought on by the other, neither wants it broadcasted to the public. After 20 minutes of battle, both instances are heavily scarred and injured. After kicking itself off of the SCP-6330-2's nose, SCP-6330-1 sprints from one side of the room towards SCP-6330-2, leaping into the air and landing a fatal blow, slicing the neck of the other instance, which falls lifeless to the floor. SCP-6330-2 is dragged by the SCP-6330-1 back under the bed. A short while later, the SCP-6330-1 emerges. Damage sustained includes loss of one buttoned eye, exposed stuffing, and torn wool. It places its sword and broken shield on a nearby nightstand. SCP-6330-1 then drags itself up the bedsheets towards the subject, who was sleeping peacefully throughout the test. It rests beside the child lying motionless. It seems to glare directly at the camera, and a small digit protrudes from its round hand, giving a thumbs up to the researchers. Its head flops onto the child's cheek before it ceases to move. The father who risked his daughter for research is pleased with the discoveries regarding both anomalies, but it brings about a new set of questions concerning children and their relationship with the dark. These very thoughts you might even wonder yourself. Maybe a kid's desire to stay up past bedtime isn't so much about wanting to watch cartoons with curse words or read Calvin and Hobbes. Maybe it's not about a desire to be awake at all, but rather a subconscious fear of being asleep. Maybe our senses as children are heightened to the anomalies that creep about. Maybe all the fabled fears of children aren't fairy tales after all. And maybe mom and dad checking under our bed is just performance parenting. Because even if something were there, would they even be able to see it? Or is everything beyond an adult's understanding misattributed to the imagination? As we age, does our perception of how reality should look alter the reality that is actually there? Do we indeed see clearer with our expensive glasses from our high-rise office space? Or did we see more accurately in the glow of our action figure nightlight, spying through stitches in our blankets, looking past crusty eye boogers at what moved in the shadows? It is hard to ever know. For every real encounter a child has with an SCP-6330, there might be hundreds of falsehoods. The ratio is truly impossible to calculate. But as long as teddy bears are universal, so too are their anomalous enemies. And so where does that fact leave us? How do we go forward? Should we be afraid to put our children to sleep? Afraid of the monsters under their bed? I don't think that's what our hero would want. Sometimes we have to learn to trust things, even if we don't understand them. Like gravity or multiplication. We have to trust that the relationship between children and their stuffed animals are in fact real. We have to learn their loyalty is reciprocated, even if the adult world has taught us otherwise. And if we ever need a reminder of these lessons, we can look to Event 184 in Cambridge, England, where we have our first recording of a sleepwalker event outside of controlled testing, and also our first piece of evidence proving SCP-6330-1 to understand language and how to use it to connect with humans in ways beyond being cute and cuddly.
On November 11, 2008, a call was filed to local authorities by a family who claimed to have discovered footage of a sleepwalker event within their son's room. Mobile Task Force Iota 12 lucid dreamers were dispatched to investigate. Immediately, the footage was seized by personnel, and all members of the family were administered Class A amnestics. The child's bed swayed lightly as an instance of SCP-6330-2 emerges. The instance resembles an unknown creature, though it is described as having a large muscular frame. The instance walks to the opposite end of the room, hunching over and observing the child for exactly 10 minutes. As the SCP-6330-2 begins to stand further upright, it extends a retractable set of claws. Then, the child's teddy bear suddenly stands, drawing a bow and quiver. SCP-6330-2 assumes a quadrupedal stance and snarls before lunging towards the bed. The SCP-6330-1 fires a single arrow towards the SCP-6330-2, striking the instance directly in its canine-like snout. SCP-6330-2 responds with a loud huff, reminiscent of that of a bull or bovine. The instances battle for approximately 30 minutes, the longest recorded sleepwalker event to date. Both show abilities and skill sets consistent with other SCP-6330-1 and -2 instances. Eventually, SCP-6330-2 has SCP-6330-1 pinned to a nearby wall and tries to strangle it. The SCP-6330-2 then pulls one of SCP-6330-1's arrows from its arm, plunging it into the -1's chest. Then the -2 leans its head towards the -1 and whispers into the instance's right ear. Though audio recordings cannot determine exactly what was vocalized, the SCP-6330-1 lifts up its head, staring blankly into SCP-6330-2's eyes. It reaches behind its back, pulling out a small, entirely wooden Glock 19 handgun. The bear points the weapon into SCP-6330-2's forehead and fires. The shot is silent, and the SCP-6330-2's body falls limp. Black viscous fluid sprays onto the wall. The SCP-6330-1 hauls SCP-6330-2's corpse towards the bed, noticeably limping. It drags the body by its large forearm and demanifests upon reaching the underneath of the bed. SCP-6330-1 returns and briefly stares around the room before turning to the child. It climbs up a desk and finds a piece of paper and a pen. It goes on to write the following note.
Hello, Timothy. Thank you for always taking care of me. It really was fun. I was able to repay the favor of protecting you. Unfortunately, I am hurt. I need to go. I'm too weak to stay, and I just hope you'll remember me. It's been fun helping you. I've enjoyed my time under your care. Going into this, I knew it would happen. The sleepwalker's coming for you. I'm just happy I could do my job. Goodbye, my friend. I hope I may see you soon.
Dr. Jack Bright is a man known by many names. And whether that name is Oh God No or just Jack, if you've spent any amount of time here on SCP Explained, you've surely at least heard of the good doctor once or twice. He's a high-ranking senior staff member at Site-19, one of the Foundation's most notable facilities, and has served as a director and important member of the Foundation's upper ranks for decades. Of course, you wouldn't be able to tell that by looking at him, because depending on the current circumstances, Dr. Bright might not look a day over 13, or 80, or 90, or he might just be a chimpanzee. This is because Dr. Bright, in his younger days, came into contact with SCP-963, a metal amulet that gives its wearer's consciousness immortality. When the amulet is moved from one body to another, Dr. Bright's consciousness moves with it, allowing him to occupy a variety of bodies. From animals to old ladies, Dr. Bright has been them all. Heck, Bright's body-swapping abilities have even proven themselves to be incredibly useful for the Foundation, so the guy's able to get some actual work done when he's not goofing off. In undercover operations, Dr. Bright has been used to infiltrate areas that the Foundation would typically have trouble reaching, or when clandestine operations are the best course of action. In the 2000 United States election, Dr. Bright briefly occupied the body of George Bush in order for the Foundation to investigate political opponent Al Gore's activities without suspicion. But that mess is a story for another day. Today we're going to be taking a look at a different side of Dr. Jack Bright, one that isn't so overt. one that's lurking behind the joking facade and silly antics so commonly associated with Bright's identity. This is SCP Explained, and we'd like to welcome you into the complicated, dramatic, and ultimately tragic world of the Bright family, specifically the story of SCP-590. Your consciousness being immortal certainly has its perks. For one, you can't die. On the other hand, you can't die. We all know the old cliche about immortality, how your friends and loved ones will grow old and die off, while you'll stay the same age. How centuries will start to feel like months. How your mind will eventually crumble under the weight of countless years and experiences, because no man was made to live this long. But while it is cliche for us, it's reality for Dr. Bright. He's painfully aware of how futile his situation is, and behind closed doors, it scares him. Dr. Bright struggles intensely with existential depression, and for good reason too. Right now he might be fine, but in the relatively near future, he'll start experiencing that cycle of death and rebirth of those around him and himself. And over time, that cycle will just keep repeating. Body after body, friend after friend, tragedy after tragedy. In the long term, Dr. Bright knows that his life cannot have a happy ending. It's most likely because of this biting, inevitable future that Bright makes the most of his time with those around him in the Foundation, making himself known as a charming, goofy personality, brimming with quirks and zaniness. The part of Bright that makes others laugh does so because deep down, Bright needs something to take his mind off his situation. He wants the same type of familiarity and comfort that he brings to other people. But Bright's public-facing persona is often torn to shreds in private. On top of being an undying soul, Bright has to contend with an even more stressful experience: his family. The Bright family is a colorful assortment of old blood that has run the inner circle of the anomalous world for generations. There are members of the Bright family that were there when the first administrator signed the policy that created the SCP Foundation, members who serve time on the Overseer Council, and even those who operate outside of the parameters of the Foundation. Dr. Bright is just one among many other individuals of major anomalous significance in his bloodline. And it's only fitting that every family has its issues. For the Brights, all strong personalities who hold positions of power in various places across the anomalous world, unity isn't exactly a strong point. In fact, most of the family isn't anywhere near each other, each member existing in their own bubble, working towards their own individual goals that often do not align with the rest of their kin. But there are occasions when the Bright family all come together to sneer at one another from across the table and enjoy a nice, loving reunion, though these meetings are often called out of necessity and are far and few between. This gathering of anomalous individuals is deemed important enough by the Foundation to have its own designated security term, nicknamed Code Brown. When a Code Brown is issued, it can only mean that the Brights are locked away in a room, convening, arguing, and scheming over something of great importance to them, and the rest of the world should stay out of their family business. And when Jack Bright got his latest call for a family meeting from one of the family members he was on speaking terms with, he could only think of just how bad of an idea that was. It had been quite some time since Bright saw the rest of his family, and he didn't particularly look forward to when they would meet again. In the time since then, Bright had been taking care of TJ, his younger brother, whose story is nearly as tragic as Jack's. Don't worry, we'll get back to the events of the family reunion soon enough. For now, let's have a look at TJ Bright. TJ was a product of the cruel, brutal attitude the early Foundation took out on the objects it contained. Needlessly cold containment procedures that denied basic needs for human anomalies, pointless tests that often resulted in death or worse, and a general lack of regard for decency or ethics. This archaic era would come to an end upon the formation of the Ethics Committee, a board formed in the upper ranks of the Foundation that would enforce a better treatment of the objects contained by the organization, with severe consequences for those that disobeyed the new, more human doctrine. But in the case of TJ Bright, there was nothing the committee could do. TJ, who had been given the designation of SCP-590 long ago, was an ordinary person who happened to have anomalous abilities, like countless others that the Foundation had dealt with before. He appeared to be permanently 16 years old, and never aging or changing in appearance once during his time in containment. The abilities in question that had caught the attention of the Foundation were TJ's inherent power to cure illness. Physical, mental injuries, and wounds. TJ could cure them all with just a touch of his hand, but at an unfortunate cost. Whatever injury TJ would cure, it would be mirrored onto his own body. A giant gaping wound could be healed by TJ, but the after effects of such as scar tissue and any lasting side effects, would later appear on his own body, leaving the boy to feel the pain of everyone he touched and healed. The early Foundation needlessly exploited SCP-590's abilities in tests and procedures, testing the limits of TJ's body and its abilities. This, of course, was carried out without the knowledge of his brother, Dr. Bright, who at the time did not have enough pull or power within the organization to save his brother. He could only watch and hope that one day, SCP-590 could live a better life outside of his cell, as TJ Bright, and not a number on a placard to be experimented with so casually. The Foundation's experiments with TJ sometimes involved the use of SCP-500, an all-curing panacea that would fully heal SCP-590 and bring him back to full health, a state that would later be reverted when the Foundation started their experiments with the boy once again. TJ had endured immeasurable pain, and as a result had suffered a broken mental state over the years. As time went by and things within the Foundation had started to change, including Jack Bright's prominence, he worked as hard as he could to push through bureaucratic red tape and work out a solution that would leave TJ in a less torturous position. And when the time came, it was Jack Bright who made the call to have SCP-590 cure a variety of specific mental conditions that would leave the boy in a dulled state, unable to fully comprehend the pain he endures should the Foundation ever have to utilize TJ's abilities again. Bright's decision to do this to his brother was questionable, and a part of the doctor regrets it to this day. But at the time, it seemed like a more preferable option than having SCP-590 be fully aware of what was happening to him. Unfortunately, the idea that TJ's reduced mental capacities would prevent him from understanding what was occurring to him was a misunderstanding, and TJ was still more than capable of perceiving what was happening to him, and that was pain. He knew he was being hurt. He knew he wasn't loved. And even though his mind was unlike Bright's or those who experimented with him, he felt the same things they did. By the time of the reunion, TJ was fully in the care of Dr. Bright. Eventually, the modern Foundation worked out that it was doing the poor boy more harm than good to keep him locked up in a cell all day. And Bright, who was now one of the most notable and important individuals in the Foundation, was able to pull enough strings to get TJ out of confinement. Now he could truly rest without worry that he would be exploited and abused, safe alongside his older brother. Inside the meeting room, all of the famous figures of the Bright family, well, the ones that were alive at least, were there. Dr. Bright sat alongside TJ, who occupied himself with a coloring book and a set of crayons. From across the table was Mikhail Bright, better known as Overseer 05-6, a former Foundation agent who operated under the name of Cowboy. 05-6 was a hardened individual with a heavy interest in firearms and a whole lot of luck on his side. Mikhail and Jack, almost at the same time, both fired out remarks about how bad of an idea they felt this reunion was. The one who called the reunion was their elder sister, Claire Bright, whose aged body felt notably out of place among the collection of forever young Brights, whether it was Jack's body hopping, TJ's longevity, or Mikhail's use of SCP-006, the Overseer Council's fountain of youth to keep himself young for an extended period of time. Also present was Yorick Elroy, Jack Bright's grandson. As the three of them discussed the state of Claire Bright's apparent aging situation, Yorick remarked that he thought she was involved with that incident at Site-23. This, Dr. Bright knew, was referring to an incident he'd rather forget, where a reality bender contained by the Foundation attempted to give the Bright family, himself, Mikhail, and TJ included, a happy ending, where they would be cured of their ailments and allowed to live ordinary lives. Of course, this was just the product of a reality bend, and the fantasy quickly fell apart when the Brights realized what was going on. Jack rather not dwelt on what could have been. Across from Yorick was Foundation agent Sarah Argent, one of the youngest members of the Bright family, who worked as an Overseer Council's Hand Sinister, a special title granted to an assassin used by the Council to sort out messy business for them. The previous Hand Sinister was none other than Mikhail Bright, whose pearl revolvers that came with the position now belonged to Sarah. Mikhail was growing impatient and asking how long it would take for the rest of the family to show up. The rest of the family being the Brights that weren't involved in the Foundation, the powerful individuals who had worked their way into various groups of interest and aspects of the anomalous world. While some directly opposed the Foundation and its mission and others were neutral, they were all Brights, which meant their presence was necessary. While the two sides sometimes worked together, there was always an air of bad blood and poor trust between them. Dr. Bright in particular was not looking forward to the rest of this meeting. The first to arrive was an individual named Nobody, who the Foundation had a difficult time keeping up with. Nobody was a title granted from one person to the next, who each worked towards a greater plan that only Nobody knew the specific details of, leaving the Foundation completely unaware of the group's larger interests. Nobody's voice was impossible to source, and her appearance was even harder to pin down, but she was there. Nobody circled around the table, remarking that the other side of the family had sent her first to make sure the Foundation Brights were all abiding by the rules. At one point in time, Nobody did have another name, but in becoming the next Nobody, she left her previous life behind. The next to arrive was Claire Lumineau II, a human with electromagnetic abilities whose motives were largely unknown. When she pulled back the chair to sit down, sparks flew in the air, briefly startling the rest of the room. After that came David Blindman, a gruff, sunglass-wearing member of the Serpent's Hand, a group of anomalous individuals who work to free anomalies from the confinements of the Foundation, who they call jailers. Blindman was Mikhail's son and possessed the anomalous ability to see into the future. He was the unofficial representative of the Unnumbered Brood, a subsection of the Bright family consisting of Mikhail's illegitimate children from his wilder days as a free-roaming Foundation agent, and a constant reminder to the Overseer of his past. Naturally, Mikhail was less than pleased to see his son arrive. And then there was Evelyn Navon, who levitated into the room wearing a traditional hijab and dress. Evelyn was one of the original 13 founding members of the SCP Foundation and matriarch of most of the Bright family. Unfortunately, Evelyn was kicked off the council for reasons unknown, but rumor has it that it had something to do with her terrible experiments as a genius geneticist, creating monsters by splicing the DNA of the ordinary and the anomalous. She sold her work to groups of interest such as Dr. Wondertainment or Prometheus Labs, who benefited from having such fine test subjects to work with. Her current activities are largely unknown, but as the rest of the family knew, they couldn't be anything good. The final member of the Bright family to enter was the only one who was trusted by all of them, and was a man of many, many names, who was most commonly referred to as Tamlin. Tamlin was a mysterious individual who existed for centuries, far longer than any other member of the family. He had something to do with time, but no one was quite sure of what it was that he did. But they all knew that he was important, and that he was the only one who attempted to keep peace and balance between the various factions of the family. Tamlin took a mental count of the room, realizing that everyone was present, and addressed them all, ready to explain why they were there. Collectively, the family came to realize that the one who called the meeting, Claire Bright, was not there. Tamlin solely explained that she had passed away, and he had called the family together in her stead to present a videotape containing her dying wish. The tape was concocted through Claire and Tamlin's time shenanigans, and featured a recording of Claire who, through Tamlin's abilities to travel through and control time, was able to respond and interact with the members of the family in the room. As morbid as Dr. Bright felt this was, he would make sure to treasure this final interaction with his sister. Claire's recording contained her will, and with Tamlin's help, she distributed gifts to the other members of the family, final remembrances she had collected from across the anomalous world for them to cherish. An egg with a universe inside of it for Evelyn, the literal sword of Damocles to hang over Mikhail's head, Jack Bright's first ever bottle of whiskey that he made so many years before, documents she entrusted to her daughter, Claire II. When it came time for TJ's gift, however, the boy suddenly grew serious and declined it. The recording of Claire understood and stated that if he didn't want it, then she would instead have Tamlin give it to someone who needed it. Dr. Bright could only wonder what it was that she had planned to give TJ, but it seemed like the boy's selfless nature had won again, and he was unable to accept it. After the gifts had been distributed, the tape cut out. Tamlin stated that this was all that Claire had recorded, and that she wanted her death to bring the family together once again, to remind them all that they were family. Claire's sincerity had brought the room to silence. Each member of the family engaged in deep thought. As Tamlin gave parting remarks, one by one, each member left. Mikhail was embarrassed by the ordeal, immediately trying to revert back to his overseer mindset, but he couldn't. Claire's loss was already affecting him. In the end, there was only Tamlin, who left a single blue rose on top of the VCR player that contained Claire's recording in remembrance of someone he felt almost understood him. As Dr. Bright left the meeting, he still felt conflicted about his family, but at the very least, he felt there was progress being made. After all, they had all been in the same room for more than 10 minutes without trying to kill one another. He glanced at the boy at his side, wondering if he made the right decision all those years ago. While that much and most of his job with the Foundation was uncertain, he knew one thing for a fact: he had to protect TJ.
To paraphrase noted scientist Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz,
if I had a nickel for every time there was a safe class anomaly that manifests an absurdly long entity that's stuck underground and pops up at multiple points around the world, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice.
Incidentally, that happens to be the case with SCP-1193, the Buried Giant, and SCP-2952, Corgi. They're a pair of mysterious creatures with very thought-provoking similarities between them. But while both are exceedingly long entities, neither are particularly long stories. So today, we're giving you a rare SCP-explained anomaly double feature. Let's begin with the first of our 2 very long boys, SCP-1193. The exact nature of SCP-1193's anomalous qualities are challenging to define. It appears to have biological, spatial, and even temporal elements. SCP-1193-01, the primary component of SCP-1193, is a human arm that appears completely normal in a genetic sense, but exhibits a freakish length and bone structure. This absurdly long arm was first discovered in a drainage pipe inside the basement of a telephone switching station in Scottsdale, Arizona, where it had somehow become trapped. How this anomaly was first discovered, or by whom, is not recorded. Approximately 10 centimeters below the drainage gate of the pipe, the arm terminates in what seems to be a human hand of indeterminate gender that is unremarkable in both size and structure. Upon initial examination, the Foundation believed that the arm somehow threaded through 35 meters of drainage pipe. But the use of an endoscopic camera within the pipe revealed that the reality is much more severe. The arm extends to at least 71 kilometers beneath the Earth, which is around double the overall length of Scottsdale, Arizona itself, with elbows regularly spaced across every 4 kilometers of arm. Elbows below a depth of 26 kilometers are slightly retroflexed to accommodate a 9 degrees southward bend in the drainage borehole. Interestingly, the arm was also somehow able to pass through the Mohorovich discontinuity, which is the lower limit of the Earth's crust and the volcanic hot upper mantle. The arm could actually be longer than what we're currently aware, but the Foundation doesn't have any technology hardy enough to follow the arm all the way down into the Earth. Conversations that Foundation staff have had with what is believed to be SCP-1193-01 via the use of SCP-1193-02 indicates that the entity may have no thermoreception. It has described itself as being stuck in environments that contextually should have either extremely high or extremely low temperatures. This does not seem to register with SCP-1193-01. This may serve as an explanation as to why it is experiencing no discomfort, despite the borehole temperatures having been measured in excess of 674 degrees centigrade. But what exactly is SCP-1193-02? SCP-1193-02 is a GPO-746 rotary telephone with a topaz yellow plastic exterior manufactured in 1971.
Because of the physical dimensions of the phone, it is too large to have been delivered from below via the borehole, so we know that SCP-1193-01 didn't put it there. The working theory of Foundation researchers assigned to the 1193 case is that the phone was installed here specifically to facilitate communications with the trapped SCP-1193-01. It is attached to a conventional twisted pair line, which enters the drainage pipe containing SCP-1193-01 and descends parallel to SCP-1193-01 until endoscopy is no longer practical. Who or what installed the phone? How? And to what end beyond just chatting with the entity? The Foundation doesn't presently know, and the investigation is ongoing. One clue to the purpose of SCP-1193-02 is the fact that its rotary dial has been permanently glued in place, rendering it unusable for any kind of outgoing calls. Instead, the phone only receives calls, and the only calls it seems to receive are from a being that seems to be SCP-1193-01. Every weekday between 8:32 a.m. and 10:34 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, the phone will ring up to 5 times. When answered by a member of Foundation personnel, an unidentified voice believed to be that of SCP-1193-01 will willingly engage in conversation with the person on the other end of the line. The Foundation has used this opportunity to question SCP-1193-01 about its own nature, but it's impossible to really know how reliable the entity's answers are. The voice on the line always refers to itself as a human being, and often mistakes the Foundation personnel for authority figures such as doctors, firemen, or police. As a result of this, the voice has been forthcoming with information, and the interviews have been relatively straightforward. There have been notable similarities between the information that the voice voluntarily gives about itself and the known facts about the condition of SCP-1193-01, lending credibility to the idea that they are one and the same. The Foundation fastidiously records conversations with the voice and has created a list of anomalous details the entity has surrendered during the phone calls. These include having human features, but an anomalous body plan. So the voice seems to have all the right pieces for a human being, but in a bizarre configuration. This may explain the extremely long, many-jointed arm. Whatever species or subspecies this entity is, it may not be alone, as the voice often refers to a cousin or some kind of other relative who's on the way to pick it up. The voice often talks about its feelings of discomfort or boredom at its state of being confined. It also makes reference to strange seismic activity along the Little Chino Fault Complex, an upper branch of the Elsinore Fault Zone of Southern California, over 300 miles away from Arizona. This may be because the source of the voice is so far underground, it's still able to feel the tremors resonating upwards. But one of the most frequent trends of all in these conversations is that the voice venting frustration that its arm, or some other body part, is stuck in an inconvenient place. This list of places has been exhaustive, but includes handcuffs, a jelly jar, a pipe, a cast, or in one instance, a gopher hole. Naturally, this has been seen as a cause for concern among Foundation staff. If SCP-1193 does have spatially anomalous components, is it possible that someone could find a 70-kilometer arm sticking out of a gopher hole or a jelly jar sometime soon? Only time will tell. The Foundation currently regards any information about the physical form of the entity beyond the exposed section of the arm reached via endoscopy as provisional. In other words, they really have no idea what they're dealing with here, and are unlikely to find out for sure anytime soon. 2 phone conversations with the voice via SCP-1193-02 have been transcribed in the addendum to 1193's main file. Both are conversations between the voice and Dr. Hassan Iqbal, Director of Research at the local SCP containment site. In the first of 2 conversations, recorded on March 24, 2008, Dr. Iqbal asked who was calling, and the voice identified itself as David. The voice, or David, appeared to be in its usual state of frustration and distress, incorrectly believing that Dr. Iqbal was a medical doctor at the hospital he was currently trapped inside. David implored him to remove the cast from his bottom arm. When Dr. Iqbal questioned David on what exactly a bottom arm is, he responded with confusion. When Dr. Iqbal told him that he was a research scientist, not a medical doctor, David became frustrated, implied that Dr. Iqbal was incompetent, and hung up. The next recorded call between Dr. Iqbal and the voice occurred exactly a year later. In this call, the voice incorrectly believed that Dr. Iqbal was a fireman. The voice complained about having reached into its oven to pull out some cakes, becoming stuck in the process. He pleaded for help, saying that the oven was a tight fit. When Dr. Iqbal showed concern about the potentially high temperatures within the oven, the voice didn't seem to know what he meant. In the end, the voice became frustrated and resolved to instead call its cousin. It apologized and hung up. Most calls appear to follow this general structure. Because of the static and incredibly subdued nature of the anomaly, the Foundation has deemed that SCP-1193 poses no meaningful risk of containment breach. As a result, it has been given the rare safe classification. In order to keep it properly contained, the drainage borehole containing SCP-1193-01 is capped with a tungsten steel grate containing a locking 2.5 cm endoscopy aperture, meaning a small hole through which to feed the endoscopic camera. Every 48 hours, the drainage borehole is inspected with an endoscope for any further developments concerning the anomalous arm. Seismographic monitoring devices are posted at 2, 7, and 11 kilometer depths alongside the SCP-1193-01 borehole. Seismic readings consistent with a subterranean movement are reported immediately to Site Director Iqbal. In the event of what is referred to as subterranean containment breach, researchers and guards working around 1193 are ordered to perform Protocol 473-A. This involves severing SCP-1193 below the fifth elbow and backfilling remaining portions of the borehole with pressurized concrete to seal the hole forever. The SCP-1193-02 phone is monitored at all times by a trained Foundation interrogator, and standard procedure dictates that SCP-1193-02 is to be answered on or before the third ring. During these calls, the interrogator will attempt to elicit valuable information about SCP-1193 from the voice, and all valuable intel will then be recorded and logged. The Buried Giant is one of the more perplexing safe-class anomalies handled by the SCP Foundation. So much about its true nature is unknown to this day, but a concern that both we and the Foundation share is not knowing where the entity's other limbs are currently residing. For all we know, they could be sticking out of an oven, a gopher hole, or even a jelly jar somewhere near you. Weird, right? Well, if you think that's strange, let us now introduce you to SCP-2952, or Corgi. Trust us, if you're not familiar with this one already, you are not ready for the strange turns this is about to take. In the simplest terms, Corgi is a cheerful Welsh Pembroke Corgi with an adorable face and a thick, shiny coat. He's also over 30,000 kilometers in length, with his head and front legs sticking out of the ground in Portland, Oregon, and his hindquarters being all the way over in a rural area of Japan's Karawa district. His body weaves all across the globe, with sections of it surfacing all over the Americas, Europe, and much of Asia. Studies to find African or Australian sections of SCP-2952 are still ongoing. Despite his massive length, there seems to be no delay in reaction times either. You pat his head in the USA and his tail will immediately start wagging over in Japan. He's honestly just precious. He also doesn't appear to need food or water, and thanks to the somewhat sadistic experiments of one researcher Mills, we know that he can quickly regenerate from all damage done to him too. Okay, now you're familiar with this very good, albeit very long lad. It's time for things to get really strange. You see, on the different exposed section of SCP-2952's body, there are tiny openings designated SCP-2952-1. Stay with us here. There are 324 openings all over the world, some in major cities, others in suburban areas, some in the tiniest and most rural of hamlets. At this point, you probably have the very reasonable question, why are there over 300 openings in this dog? Well, we're going to answer that, but we can't promise it won't just give you more confusing questions. When the openings appear, humanoid beings designated SCP-2952-2 will begin to exit the Corgi. For the sake of clarity, we'll refer to these little creatures as the Welsh Fair Folk, or the Fae, though there are many different subgroups of Fae, and we really do mean little in this case. On average, they're a puny 3 centimeters tall, and they're also invisible to the naked eye, with indirect methods like photographs or videos being the only way to view them. Though they do leave evidence of their presence beyond their direct physical appearances, like shadows or footprints. Corgi acts as a kind of transport system for these little people. Openings on the dexterous side of SCP-2952 take passengers west, while those on the sinistrous side take passengers east.
Passengers can be seen entering and exiting at regular intervals. The Foundation has even been able to track a group of passengers getting on the Corgi transit system and getting off at a later stop. From this, the Foundation has been able to estimate that the speed of the system is 120 kilometers per hour, excluding stops to let passengers on and off along the way, which, for the record, is a pretty leisurely pace by train standards. Naturally, the SCP Foundation weren't exactly thrilled to learn about an anomalous transit system that worked to spread further anomalies all over the world. In fact, that's kind of a nightmare scenario for them. So they marshaled their global forces, located each of the openings along the torso of the Corgi system, and blocked them up. At this point, the SCP Foundation were ready to give themselves a pat on the back, close up shop for the night, and go out for after-work drinks. However, there was one thing that they'd all forgotten. Hell hath no fury like a society of Welsh Fae who've just had their daily commute ruined. The Council of Tylwyth Teg, their ruling body, doesn't take kindly to having their public services messed with, and the manner of their retaliation was less like a group of disgruntled, anomalous civil servants and more like a kind of Fae mafia. They would make the Foundation rue the day they messed with Corgi, with a series of retaliatory strikes that group of interest like Chaos Insurgency and the Children of the Scarlet King could only dream of. It began with the kidnapping of Project Director Stevens, who'd authorized the containment project. He vanished from his apartment and was replaced with an adult European mole, which seems to be the Fae equivalent of leaving a horse's head in the bed as
an offer you can't refuse,
to send a message. But it didn't stop there. Over the next 3 weeks, 17 different members of personnel, specifically construction workers, who'd worked on the project woke up to find the walls of their houses had been entirely replaced by poison ivy and deathcap mushrooms. And after 2 months, researcher Mills, the weird dog torturer we told you about earlier, woke up with a highly poisonous nightshade berries in his mouth and hawthorn stakes driven through his hands and feet, crucifixion style. All perpetrated by some very upset 3-inch transport workers. At this point, the Foundation put together who was behind these attacks and decided to try to make amends with the Fae whom they'd understandably upset with their treatment of Corgi. A plan was drafted to have all the SCP-2952-1 entrances unburied. After this undertaking was completed, the Fae retribution came to an end, and most of the damage was undone. Director Stevens was returned unharmed. The construction workers got their walls back. And, well, researcher Mills didn't get better, but I think we can all agree that animal cruelty isn't really a crime that we should be forgiving lightly. After all this chaos had transpired and the SCP Foundation had fully made amends, Director Stevens had a note left on his desk by a starling, which then flew off before it could be caught. By the way, can we just take a second to appreciate that the SCP Foundation has contained literal demigods and interdimensional horrors, but Director Stevens was outfoxed by a bird? Wonderful, those Fae truly are built different. Anyway, the note on his desk, translated from Welsh, read, "Thank you for your prompt response to commuter complaints and wonderful customer service. As such, we have granted all members of your organization complimentary transportation on our Corgi system. Please send a sparrow to the Council of the City office nearest you if you have further questions. G. Foxglove, Director of Transportation, the Council of the Tylwyth Teg." And with tremendous relief that the slate had finally been cleared, the Foundation decided that they would accept the kind offer extended to them by the Council and send one of their field agents to take a look inside the Corgi system. The field agent in question was Agent Elizabeth Davies, chosen for her pleasant social skill and proficiency in Welsh. With the intention to take a ride in mind and connected to an audio and video feeds linked back to Central Command, Agent Davies touched the site of Corgi. This caused her to shrink down to a height of 3.2 centimeters, much like all the other commuters. She stepped into the SCP-2952 entrance and found that on the inside, it looked not unlike a regular train, though some carriages seemed to be in disrepair and everything was written in Welsh. Oh, and everything was made with wood and plant matter too. The chassis appeared to be constructed from birch, and all the seat cushions were made of flower petals. It was all very whimsical, honestly. Agent Davies struck up conversations with some of the other commuters. One complained about delays caused by the fact that Corgi was suffering from kidney stones, a problem that the Foundation is eager to help the poor animal get over to keep the transit system running smoothly. She also chatted with a sweet elderly lady on the train who was getting people to sign a petition to allow mice back onto the Corgi transit system. When Agent Davies departed the system, she patted the dog and told him he was a good boy, before returning to normal size.
Since January 5, 2017, the Corgi system and its passengers have become invisible to everyone who wasn't officially under SCP Foundation employ. This has allowed it for its reclassification as a safe anomaly. So there you have it, folks. At least one of our two very long boys got everything sorted out. We love occasionally doing a happy ending here at SCP Explained. Remember to stay tuned for our next episode about the time that SCP-106 managed to get onto a school bus. What? We did say occasionally. All hell had broken loose. Sophie could barely believe she had survived for this long. Getting used to one dramatic change in her life was hard enough, but almost immediately after, the entire world had seemed to go crazy. As a result, she now had a whole new existence to try and adapt to, scavenging for what little scraps of food she could find in the ruined, desolate city. The monsters could appear at any time, day or night, either one on their own or whole droves of the nightmarish creatures that had been let loose on the world. This life was somehow far more dangerous on a day-to-day basis than her old one had been. And given Sophie used to work for the SCP Foundation, that really was saying something. Formerly known as Dr. Cartwright, she had been a researcher at the Foundation for a number of years. While she had been far from reaching the upper echelons of the organization's most notorious staff, with the likes of Drs. Jack Bright and Kane Pathos Crow, nobody could deny Sophie was an expert when it came to studying the anomalous. As much as she understood the importance of their directive to safeguard humanity, the Foundation had, first and foremost, been a job to her, a means to an end, something to earn a living from and then move on. It wasn't worth giving up everything for, and when her life needed more focus than her work, Sophie wasn't hesitant to step away. Her mother had fallen ill, terminally, and as a result needed around-the-clock care. So Dr. Sophie Cartwright had no choice but to hand in her resignation from the SCP Foundation. There were times when she missed it, and moments after her mother eventually passed that Sophie considered going back. But she came to realize it wasn't the work itself she missed, not even her co-workers at the Foundation. It was the occasional rare anomaly that was just a completely harmless little oddity, not a monstrous abomination. Often in her new, unfamiliar life of resignation, Sophie would find herself looking wistfully at a picture of herself and one such anomaly. Technically, it was against the Foundation's rules to possess any photographic evidence of SCPs, but Sophie had made sure it didn't look like anything out of the ordinary. The picture had been taken on her phone and showed Sophie crouching down with the face of a curious but completely normal-looking black and gray tabby cat poking up in the foreground. Nothing about the picture gave any indication that the cat, named Josie, was actually missing her hindquarters and back legs. SCP-529, as the Foundation had designated her, was one of the few completely harmless SCPs in their care. Her only anomalous trait being that her entire back half was missing, either because it didn't exist or had somehow been displaced in another dimension, hence her nickname, Josie the Half-Cat. Given that she had been allowed to roam freely around the Foundation facility she was kept in, Josie had run across Dr. Cartwright a number of times, the pair of them eventually becoming friends. With a sigh and smile, Sophie had been looking at the photo on the day everything went wrong. Steel-capped boots came rushing up the stairs and down the corridors to her apartment, worn by a group of black-clad mercenaries. You see, unbeknownst to Sophie at the time she had tendered her resignation from the SCP Foundation, a number of the organization's higher-ups had also done the same. While Sophie's reasons for leaving were purely personal, the wave of resignations from other high-ranking Foundation personnel came as a reaction to something called Project Pneuma. This was an operation that had uncovered a disturbing truth about the psychosphere, a shared human unconsciousness that had led to the O5 Council proposing a new directive for the organization. Those that objected left the Foundation. Others were killed by their former employer and its merciless hit squads in cold blood. Perhaps thanks to some administrative error filing Sophie's resignation alongside those that had left after learning about Pneuma, or maybe because the Foundation didn't want her extensive knowledge of the anomalous being used against their newfound directive, they had sent a mobile task force to her apartment. Filing down the corridor, the soldiers lifted a battering ram and swung it forward, shattering the door, wooden splinters littering the floor as they breached the entrance. But Sophie had heard them coming, escaping as fast as she could, descending a fire escape ladder until she reached the street below. At that moment in time, Sophie had no idea why the Foundation had sent a hit squad out to kill her. Of course, the answer to that question quickly became obvious. Shortly after, reports came pouring in from all over the world, broadcast over every news channel before they were ultimately blocked. The SCP Foundation had gone public, revealing its existence to the entire world and declaring its new mission statement. Rather than protecting the world from anomalies, the Foundation had declared war, calling for the total and utter extinction of humanity. While Sophie had no way of knowing the reasons for the Foundation going rogue, it was clear that working for them in the past had put a target on her back. Luckily, she managed to avoid the MTF coming after her, getting swept up in a crowd that was fleeing from something far more horrific. SCP-682 had been released and was devouring people in broad daylight. The waking nightmare didn't stop there. Over the next few months, the Foundation released a number of dangerous anomalies on the world, using them to slaughter innocent people in droves, assassinate world leaders, and cripple organizations like the Global Occult Coalition to hinder humanity's chances of fighting back. And amongst it all, living through the chaos and carnage were tiny pockets of survivors. Although those two were starting to be rapidly picked off by the Foundation, deploying more of their mobile task force operatives or compliant SCPs to eliminate the refugees. Sophie had witnessed firsthand the Foundation's attacks, and as a result, had found it best to keep moving from camp to camp, only staying with one group of fellow survivors for a few nights each before moving on. She wasn't sure if the Foundation was specifically attacking the refugee camp she stopped at, or if it was a continuous, systematic extermination effort. She'd been noting down her ponderings in a half-burned notebook she had found while scavenging abandoned grocery stores for any remaining food that was still edible. A cynical part of her thought that it was perhaps pointless to document what was happening, but the former researcher in Sophie wanted to preserve any information she could about what the Foundation was subjecting people to. If anything, that knowledge might prove useful to someone in the future. Although, what future was a question Sophie Cartwright kept returning to, with no optimistic answer in sight. It was easy to miss how things had once been, to yearn for life, to get back to the way it once was, even though it was impossible now that the anomalies were rampaging the world over. It made sleeping hard, the fear of waking up to see the face of SCP-682 or SCP-096 staring back at her the moment she opened her eyes. One night, it was worse than ever. Every sound, no matter how faint or far away in Sophie's mind, could have been made by a carnivorous creature or an approaching Foundation foot soldier. A bottle clinked, waking Sophie from her restless sleep. Something was nearby, and from the sound of it, it was getting closer and closer. Sitting up in the alleyway she'd been sleeping in, Sophie looked around her, feeling her heart thumping against her ribs in fear. Then, through the dark, she caught the sight of a pair of beady, reflective eyes, followed by the sounds of a drawn-out, defensive yowl. For a second, she wondered if it could be. No, surely not. The eyes approached, a small, shadowy form behind them. Sophie could barely make it out in the night's darkness, even with the glow of distant fires in the sky on the horizon. But from what she could see, the creature approaching her was small, just about smaller than an average cat, about half the size. Her fingers trembling, she reached out a hand towards it as gently as she could, allowing it to sniff her for a moment. Then she felt it duck under her open palm, letting her stroke up its arched back. When her hand reached about halfway, Sophie could feel the slight yield of a barely tangible back half, which could only mean one thing. "Josie?" Sophie asked, holding a sob at the back of her throat. The little half-cat replied with a meow, recognizing the voice of her human friend from the Foundation. Immediately she leaped into the former researcher's lap, allowing Dr. Cartwright to hold her and stroke her. Giving in, so glad to be reunited with Josie, Sophie started to let out stifled sobbing sounds, careful not to attract attention, but allowing herself to be the happiest she'd felt in months since this had all started. Although she had no way of understanding Josie's meows, Dr. Cartwright assumed that the brave little half-cat had managed to escape the Foundation facility she used to call home with relative ease. And she was right. Since Josie was allowed to roam freely, She had been able to make a break for it when the Foundation's MTF kill squads opened fire on their own personnel at their various sites across the globe. The loud noise had caused Josie the half-cat to flee and hide until the sounds of gunfire and screams had all died down. By the time she emerged from her hiding place, a number of the anomalies once kept in containment had now been set loose on the world. With the facility busted wide open, SCP-529 had taken it upon herself to leave, and had been surviving in much the same way Sophie had, scavenging for scraps, passing from one refugee camp to the next, usually greeted with curiosity by any ordinary civilian who had never seen a cat with its entire back half missing. Now that they had been tearfully reunited, Josie and Sophie stuck together on their continuing travels through the now treacherous and SCP-infested world. Sophie's entries in her makeshift journal started to take on much more positive tones. While it was hard to be entirely optimistic living through an anomalous apocalypse, her spirits were at least lifted by having her little half-cat companion alongside her. Josie never seemed to stray too far from Sophie's side as they hiked their way across the country. Occasionally, SCP-529 would climb up her human friend's back and rest on her shoulders as they traversed more open terrain, her missing back half making it look like the little half-cat was perched precariously on her front two legs, next to Sophie's head. And, of course, whenever they stopped for the night, Josie would sleep curled up and purring contentedly, right next to Sophie. When the next morning came, she would awaken, stretch out her front paws with a yawn, then nuzzle at Sophie's sleeping face to wake her up. At first, Dr. Cartwright's plan had been to head due west from where she had started, hoping to reach Yellowstone National Park and access SCP-2000. There was a Foundation facility there, hidden deep underground and filled with all manner of anomalous technology. It was all intended to be used in case the world ended, and the human race was wiped out, even capable of mass-producing new human beings with customized memories, as well as holding a backup of all cumulative knowledge and data on Earth. Every book ever written, every terabyte of information on the internet, everything. However, passing through another camp, Sophie and Josie received word from one of the other survivors. Apparently, the Foundation had predicted that somebody with knowledge of SCP-2000 might try something like that, and how it would undermine their plans to wipe out humanity. During one of the moments where rebelling groups were able to temporarily restore TV and internet service, it was reported that the Foundation had already put a stop to that potential option from reverting their apocalypse. They had intentionally triggered an eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano, totally obliterating the facility housing SCP-2000 and one of humanity's last hopes at survival. Well, thanks for telling me, Sophie sighed. By now, she had long given up almost all hope that things would ever be the same again. But hearing the news about Yellowstone had extinguished the last little ember of optimism that she had left. There was no way back. Sensing her friend was upset, Josie meowed at her, either as if to tell Sophie, "It's okay," or, "I'm hungry." As the pair turned to leave, though, the other survivor called out at them. "Wait!" they said. "Look, I heard another rumor, and it might be a total myth, but there's meant to be a sanctuary not far from here." "What do you mean, sanctuary?" Sophie asked. "Like another camp? The Foundation will wipe it out within a week." "No, not a camp," the survivor replied. "It's just a rumor, but supposedly there's a refuge, some place where the SCP Foundation can't get to. Apparently there's a shelter, as well as plenty of food and water, probably enough for you and the little one." Sophie looked out of the corner of her eye at Josie, balanced on her shoulder. The pair of them had gone weeks without eating before arriving at this camp, and she had no idea how long it would be before they reached the next. The sight of her half-cat companion motivated her. They needed to survive. As long as they did, the Foundation couldn't win. Giving the other survivor a nod, they pointed her in the right direction. "That way, a few miles at least, but you gotta be careful getting through the forest," they explained. "Be careful. The Foundation's got people out on patrols over there, and they're real weird too. I seen them doing this strange ritual, letting their commander stab them, testing whether they can still feel pain or not." Within a few hours, the sun had set, with both Sophie and Josie deep in the heart of the woods. Just like every night since the Foundation had initiated their war on humanity, every sound, every snapped twig or rustling leaves in the breeze, filled Sophie with dread. But this time, at least she knew with certainty that there were MTF troops nearby. She could see their flashlights, beams of light bleeding through between the trees. Carefully holding Josie in her arms, she stepped carefully and quietly as she could through the forest. The half-cat was trembling, clearly feeling just as fearful as Sophie was. The former researcher was praying that her little friend wouldn't make a sound. She knew she wouldn't be able to help it if she did. Cats did instinctively make defensive yowls if they felt threatened, but even the slightest noise from Josie would give away their position to the MTF sweeping the area. "Fan out!" she heard the task force's field commander call. "Even spread. If there's anyone here, you all know what to do." Sophie ducked down behind a fallen tree, covering her own mouth with her free hand, trying to stop her panicked breathing. Her only option were to make a break for it, dashing through the forest in hope she and Josie weren't caught, or worse, killed. Though these days there was really no difference between the two. Or she could wait for the MTF to pass by, continuing their search. She had spent months trying to survive in this anomalous apocalyptic nightmare. By now the Foundation couldn't have known she was there. Their forces were just combing the forest looking for any survivors they could find. But if she stayed still, there was still a chance one of the MTF would find her and Josie, and would either alert the others or just open fire on the spot. All things considered, neither option sounded ideal. Josie was getting restless, trying to wriggle free of Sophie's grip. The half-cat's incorporeal back half meant Sophie could only hold what little underside the feline friend had. Slowly she started to get up and made her way out from behind the tree, right into the path of an MTF trooper's flashlight. "Got a live one!" he yelled. A flash of light and a loud bang echoed through the forest. The bullet had torn through Sophie's chest, nearly missing her half-cat, but the noise of the shot had been more than enough to startle her. As Sophie dropped to the forest floor, gripping her heavily bleeding wound and writhing in pain, Josie leaped into the air towards the Foundation operative. Either in shock or because she somehow understood her protector had been shot, the brave little cat started clawing at the soldier's face. Despite her sharp front claws tearing at him, leaving red lines over his face, the armed man didn't react. It was as if he couldn't feel pain at all. The MTF trooper gripped Josie by the neck fur, pulling her away from him. Before he could reach for his sidearm, someone charged at him, knocking the Foundation operator over. Another shot rang out as he fell, tackled by Sophie. Meanwhile, Josie had dropped to the ground, landing on her two visible feet and hissing at the soldier. Scrambling to her feet, Sophie picked up Josie and ran, the sounds of the rest of the task force receding into the distance behind her. The little half-cat was looking back over her human friend's shoulder, watching as the sweeping flashlights of the MTF kill squad fanned between the trees until they eventually disappeared from view. Her earlier adrenaline spike began to drop sharply in time with the gradual rise of the sun. Sophie had long since slowed down, certain that she'd be able to give the Foundation's foot soldiers the slip. Josie had taken her favorite perch on Sophie's shoulder again, meaning she could use her hands to apply pressure to her two wounds. But with every step, the former researcher could feel her limbs getting heavier. Her pulse, which had drummed faster than ever as her and her half-cat had fled, was now slowing down with every fading beat. She was tired, so much that she could barely keep her head up, until eventually, Sophie had to stop. She sat at the edge of a lake in the middle of the forest, exhaustedly trying to catch her breath. Calmly, Josie hopped off her shoulder and sat down at her side, licking her paw and cleaning behind her ears. Sophie looked at her little friend and smiled, feeling a tear run down her face. She reached into her bag and produced her journal, tearing out a page and scrawling down a note with the last of her strength. "To whoever finds this half-cat, her name is Josie. She's my only friend left in the whole world. I've taken care of her for as long as I can, but I'll be dead soon. Please take care of her for me. Take her to safety. Be good to her, and she'll be good to you. And if you scavenge any cheese, only give her a little as a treat." After tying the note to Josie's midsection, so it rested atop her semi-corporeal back half, Sophie looked around one last time. The lake was calm, a tiny pocket of remaining peace in a world gone mad, overrun with anomalies. "Guess we did make it to a sanctuary after all, Josie," she whispered weakly. Giving her little half-cat one last scratch behind the ears, Josie meowed gratefully. Finally, unable to keep her eyes open and her head up any longer, Sophie Cartwright let herself drift off. Josie was left meowing at her friend to wake up. She sat with her all day. She didn't move, didn't even wake up when Josie nuzzled her face against hers like she had before. Sophie's face felt much colder now against the confused half-cat's fur. Eventually, Josie wandered off into the forest, towards an uncertain future. Maybe if this future wasn't set in stone, if it could be reset, then Josie the half-cat would see her friend Sophie again. A terrified man huddles in the corner, heart pounding and teeth chattering. He sees them coming towards him, huge 8-legged figures, 10 feet tall at least, with 8 black, soulless eyes that seem to stare hungrily at him. It's like something out of a nightmare. Giant man-eating spiders everywhere. They approach the man, fangs dripping with venom. But just as they're about to strike, he vanishes. He won't be spider food today, but for this truly unlucky guy, his ordeal is far from over. Let's rewind. When life gets a little too boring, we all daydream about getting away. Maybe you imagine sitting on a tropical beach or camping in the mountains and breathing in the fresh air. Some of the more adventurous types with a vivid imagination might daydream about visiting a parallel universe. Who wouldn't want the chance to see what life is like in another dimension? Of course, it would only be fun to go there if you could control where you went and when you could come back. Without any control over it, the ability to hop back and forth between dimensions would turn from a blessing to a curse. Just ask SCP-507. SCP-507, unlike most other SCPs, is a seemingly normal human man. He has blonde hair, green eyes, an unrecognizable accent, and no other features that might make him stand out. He looks perfectly average, like a stranger you'd pass on the street and never give a second thought to. What sets him apart is not a physical attribute, but rather an ability that he has yet to develop a firm grasp on. He is a dimension hopper, with no control over where he goes or when he'll get back. After appearing on the grounds of a mental treatment facility with no identification, rambling about a world of giant spiders, SCP-507 was admitted to the hospital and sedated for his own safety. He would spend several months in treatment for a variety of supposed disorders, but once he became aware of his surroundings, he attempted to escape the hospital multiple times. During these escape attempts, he often eluded hospital staff by mysteriously disappearing and reappearing in seemingly impossible places, such as behind locked doors or in rooms blocked off from the rest of the hospital. These disappearances and reappearances seem to be, contrary to what the hospital staff first believed, beyond his control. The SCP Foundation became aware of the strange phenomena surrounding 507, and he was removed from the hospital and brought to an SCP Foundation facility. Once there, the nature of his abilities became much clearer. SCP-507 is able to, without intent or even knowledge that it is about to occur, shift from this reality to another alternate reality. After some time there, with the amount of time varying from case to case, he will shift back to this reality. He has been known to shift realities while sleeping, in the middle of a sentence, and even while bathing or going to the bathroom. The shifts are unpredictable, and there is no telling what kind of horrors he will encounter in the new dimension where he ends up, leading to 507 having seen some very strange things, even by SCP Foundation standards. During one of his shifts, 507 found himself in a pitch-black room filled with the sound of muted breathing. Using a flashlight he had been given by the Foundation, he looked around and found that he was not alone. In the room with him was a man, wearing a black suit and sunglasses, with a frightening, inhumanly wide smile. The smiling man leaned in towards 507 so close that their faces nearly touched, and said, "Back so soon?" Terrified, 507 fired several rounds from a Foundation-issued pistol, then curled up in the corner of the room until he shifted back to our reality. This would not be the last time that he encountered the smiling man. According to document 507-3B, which details all of 507's shifts into other realities, 507 was found in a Midwestern cornfield by Foundation staff with brown liquid on his cheek. In his hand, he held a human heart with the words, "I need you," written on it in the same brown liquid. Before he shifted back and landed in the cornfield, 507 shifted to a pitch-black room filled with the sound of muffled crying. He turned on his flashlight, taking note of his surroundings, and found himself face to face with the smiling man once again. The smiling man had brown liquid leaking from around its sunglasses, which it wiped onto 507's cheek. Upon further examination, 507 saw several bullet holes in the smiling man's suit, leaking the same brown liquid. He attempted to fire his pistol like he had the previous time, but it did not fire. As the smiling man began to approach him, 507 turned and ran. He ran for about 10 minutes before finding a corner where he stayed huddled once again until he shifted back. The smiling man is not the only nightmare that SCP-507 has encountered on his travels. During another shift, 507 described appearing in a small room filled with dried corpses, a single window, and a flickering light hanging from a ceiling. While attempting to wait out his time in the room, he discovered that the corpses were capable of movement. Whenever the room was in darkness, the corpses would pose themselves like living people. When he looked out the window, the corpses would join him and look out the window with him. When he sat down, they would sit with him in a circle. 507 attempted to pass time by falling asleep, but was unable to do so. Though many of his experiences were disturbing, only one of 507's documented shifts resulted in him requesting a memory wipe from the SCP Foundation. On this one, he found himself in the maternity wing of a large hospital. A creature, dressed like a nurse, approached 507 and told him that he was upsetting the other patients, and that it was time to start the operation. 507 was then wrapped in a straitjacket and wheeled into an operating room. After the straitjacket was taken off, 507 grabbed a chair and swung it wildly at the creatures to keep them at bay until he shifted back. When he asked to describe the appearance of the nurse creature, 507 began screaming in terror and was unable to provide a coherent description. He attempted to provide a drawing of the creature, but was only able to produce a series of jagged lines. Following this encounter, his request for a memory wipe was denied. Other shifts included going to a world where every surface was covered with an unidentifiable mold, a land of icy tundras populated by aggressive bears, and one place that he refused to describe beyond repeating the phrase, "so many spiders." Not all of the worlds that 507 has encountered are frightening. Some are simply strange and unusual. During one shift, he found himself on a large basketball court, where 6 other individuals were playing a game of basketball. There were 2 humans, 2 insectoid creatures, 1 creature resembling a squid, and 1 hovering yellow sphere with 8 arms. When 507 asked where he was informed that he had arrived at the All-Species Sports Center. During another shift, 507 found himself in a world made entirely of gelatin. During yet another shift, he appeared in a large auditorium filled with 50,000 other Dimension Hoppers who were holding a political rally for the People's Dimension Hopper Republic. Working with the Republic over the course of 2 weeks, 507 helped to overthrow the United States government and establish a new one run by Dimension Hoppers. SCP-507 was elected representative of Massachusetts, but just before he could introduce his first official piece of legislation, he shifted back to our reality. One day at the facility, a particularly unusual event involving SCP-507 occurred, the events of which were documented in Interview 507-G. During a regular check-in, it was discovered that there were somehow 2 identical versions of SCP-507 in its room. They had apparently each arrived in the room independently and had been talking to one another for about half an hour before being discovered. These 2 versions were referred to as 507-A and 507-B. When prompted for an explanation, 507-B explained that there were more than one version of SCP-507 afflicted with uncontrollable dimension hopping. The doctor inquired as to which one of the 2 was the visitor, but the 2 declined to answer, fearing that this knowledge would cause the Foundation to view one of them as expendable. The 2 had multiple shared experiences that they related to the doctor, including both having encounters with the smiling man. During the interview, 507-B disappeared mid-sentence and did not reappear. The doctor asked 507-A about identifiable differences between his and his double's realities. 507-A explained that in 507-B's world, President Lincoln was killed by his vice president, whereas in 507-A's world, he was killed by General Lee. This revelation made it clear that neither 507-A nor 507-B were native to this reality. After this was revealed, 507-A was terminated and examined. No biological reason for 507's ability to hop from dimension to dimension was found, though it was discovered that several pieces of 507 will shift dimensions along with the rest of the body. 3 days after this interview was conducted, the correct SCP-507 reappeared, with no knowledge of his doppelgangers or what became of them. SCP-507 is classified as safe, meaning he doesn't require any real effort to contain. He's also safe in the more literal sense, in that he poses no threat to anyone else. The only person in danger in the presence of SCP-507 is himself, as he has been exposed to many dangerous conditions during his reality shifts, and it's never known whether 507's next shift will end up being his last. With the cause of his shifts still being unknown, there is nothing that the Foundation can do to prevent them. All they can do is monitor him and provide him with the items that might ensure his safety in the future, like a handgun loaded with rubber bullets, a tank of air, a high-intensity flashlight, a week of ration packs, a pair of binoculars, a tracking collar, and a camera. The tracking collar allows the Foundation to recover 507 when he shifts back to our reality, in a location other than the containment facility. The rest of the equipment was granted at his request, based on obstacles that he encountered in other dimensions. Due to his docile nature, 507 is given freedom to move about the facility, but when he leaves his private room, an agent must go with him to document any shifts that might occur. No one is allowed to touch SCP-507 though, if it has been more than 2 weeks since a shift occurred. This policy stems from an incident in which an agent who was touching 507's shoulder at the time of a shift was taken with him and did not return. When he is not shifting, SCP-507 lives a relatively normal life at the facility. He is allowed his own computer with internet access and can meet with other safe or Euclid-class SCPs that are not infectious or detrimental to his health. 507 has expressed an interest in the unusual and paranormal, and has enjoyed meeting with other SCPs, including a request to visit SCP-082 for a vacation. So far, all of these meetings have occurred without incident. Due to his anomalous shifting, SCP-507 will never be able to live a normal life. Unless he stops shifting, he will likely spend the rest of his days bouncing between unknown dimensions and his containment facility. Just like so much else about him, his relationship to his special talent is a bit of a paradox. He has the ability to go anywhere, to see things no other person on Earth has ever seen. However, because he cannot control it, cannot stop it, no matter how far away he can travel, he will never truly be free. Some of the anomalies the SCP Foundation deals with are dangerous, with the most powerful able to end all life and even reality as we know it. Others pose no threat at all and seem content to simply exist. Still others are something else entirely. SCP-4999 is a humanoid entity, though its appearance seems to fluctuate between manifestations, with the only unchanging detail being that it always is dressed in dark formal wear. Originally thought by many to be an urban legend, local tales of SCP-4999 are what initially tipped the Foundation off to its existence, and further research indicates that there are accounts that may be referring to the appearances of 4999 throughout recorded history. Strangest of all, though, is the consistency with which it appears, or rather the consistent situations and types of people it appears to. From the data available, it seems that SCP-4999 only appears to people in a very specific type of need, as you'll see in the case of a subject named Alex Hereford and the fateful night he experienced. The road was slippery, and Alex was driving too fast. He knew this, of course, but it's a different matter altogether to know a thing and to care about it. Rain hammered on the front windshield, the weak headlights of his 2005 Honda Civic barely punching into the thick, black night ahead of him. Winding through the mountainside, The road was mostly empty, save for the very occasional twin beams of light blazing past him due to his high speed. It was hard to hear the honking of angry horns over the heavy pounding of the rain. Then it happened. In a way, Alex knew it was inevitable. His tread-worn wheels finally lost contact with the ground, a thick layer of rainwater between them and asphalt betraying his speeding vehicle's grip on the road and sending it careening out of control. He had expected fear, but instead felt nothing really. A slight sense of anticipation, like wincing right before a punch lands in that childhood game of hitting each other on the arm. It wasn't that the world had slowed down, but perhaps his brain was simply working at a much greater velocity now, recognizing its own impending death. His speed of thought seemed magnified to the point of slowing his perception down. He heard of soldiers in war zones experiencing the same phenomenon, as they felt sure that in the next few seconds, they'd be dead. Alex wondered, would he smash into a tree, go off a cliff's edge? He could hardly see the forest or the terrain beyond in the thick rain and the dark of the mountain. Though he traveled this road 1,000,000 times before, he had no idea where he actually was tonight. He supposed it wouldn't really matter, which it was. As usual, his thoughts turned to her, or rather, they had simply run their course and returned to the one place they always did. It wasn't like there were many other people to think about in Alex's mostly empty life. There was, and always had been, since the moment he'd met her, mostly just her. But even Alex's heightened state of mind couldn't delay the inevitable for long. It would be a cliff after all, Alex thought curiously, catching a glimpse of town lights far away and below. The car spun 180 degrees out into empty air, then came crashing down with a horrible roar of shattered glass and tearing metal as it tumbled down the hillside. Even over the torrential downpour, the noise of Alex's crash was significant, had anyone been around to hear it. Finally, after over 100 feet down a steep incline, the car smashed into a single thick oak tree, bringing the disaster to an end. As if on cue, the rain began to let up, slowly at first, then all of a sudden in that peculiar way that northwest torrential downpours tend to do, as if the sky had at last finished emptying itself all at once. Inside the shattered vehicle, Alex was, incredibly, alive, at least for the time being. The airbag deployment had spared his face the worst of it, and the sturdy aluminum frame of the vehicle had given its all in protecting Alex's body from the downhill crash. But even postmodern vehicle engineering had its limits. His breath came in slow, ragged gasps, difficult at first, but gradually steadying. Not an improvement in his condition, but rather his body dedicating the rapidly dwindling resources at its disposal into keeping vital functions going as long as possible. Opening his eyes, Alex was surprised to find himself right side up, less surprised to look down at the shattered mess his limbs and lower body had become. Gradually, Alex's thoughts cleared, his sense of self returning after the bone-jarring drop down the steep incline and sudden stop at the end. Looking to his right, he could see the trunk of the tree that had stopped his out-of-control tumble. Despite himself, Alex laughed, a weak, gurgling chuckle. So, it was the cliff and a tree after all. He focused on breathing, letting the waves of pain wash over him until his brain eventually canceled them out by injecting his broken body with adrenaline and chemicals. Everything was quiet and still after the crash and the rain, but to his surprise, he could hear something. It was faint at first, just a soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, but the sound grew louder and louder until at last, it came to a stop outside Alex's window. With every ounce of effort, Alex turned his head towards the sound. A rescuer? No, impossible. Nobody was up on this mountain, and nobody could possibly have reached him here so quickly, even if there had been. He supposed he should have been surprised, yet almost from the moment that his eyes fell on the tall, handsome figure with the casual yet fashionably cut black suit, Alex accepted him for what he was. There was no shock, no confusion. For the second time tonight, just a calm sense of acceptance. The man, probably somewhere in his mid-30s, leaned down to peer in through the window. He said nothing as he casually observed the extent of Alex's injuries. Satisfied, he laid a hand on Alex's shoulder. The grip was firm, but not painfully so, just strong enough to communicate, "I'm here with you. Things will be all right." After a slight squeeze, the figure reached inside his jacket and produced a pack of cigarettes, packing the tobacco with swift taps against his palm before removing 2 cigarettes and offering one to Alex. Alex nodded his head, a very small motion that exploded pain across his shattered body. "No, thank you, but that stuff will kill you." Alex smiled. The man paused for a moment, the ghost of a smile showing on his face for just a moment before disappearing. Returning the offered cigarette, the man took his own and lit it, giving Alex a good look at his face in the light of his cigarette lighter. Alex had been right. The man appeared to be somewhere in his mid to late 30s. Handsome, but not cover model, so just pleasing to the eyes. He sported short hair, carefully combed and perfectly neat, completely unaffected by the slight drizzle that still fell. The more Alex looked at him, though, the less he could remember about the man's exact features. It wasn't that they changed in any way, but rather that he simply couldn't hold on to any details for more than a few seconds. "I'm dying, aren't I?" The figure didn't speak, nor did it nod or make any form of verbal or bodily communication. He simply looked, and Alex understood. Alex had never been particularly religious or spiritual, but in that look, he understood that there was a world beyond, and one that he would very quickly be entering into. It was as if, for the first time in his life, he was able to probe that world, reality peeling away just enough to glimpse what was beyond. Twisting paths through planes of shadow and light both, shuffling figures along each, and at the very center of it all, a light? No, a feeling. Love, pulsing forth like the beating heart of it all. The saints had their angels, the wicked their demons, but everyone else in between the two, they had him, a guide, someone to watch over them on their final journey. Alex coughed. It was ending soon. The man took a drag from his cigarette and removed a handkerchief from another hidden pocket, carefully dabbing away the blood around Alex's chin, then returned to his silent smoking. His vision was beginning to dim around the edges, the noises of the forest growing more and more distant. Alex knew it wouldn't be long now, but he had just one final thing to do. As he always knew they would, his thoughts returned to her, here, at the end. Once more, he turned his head towards the passenger's side seat, pain exploding across his body with the motion. There, just on the far edge of the seat, as his phone, having miraculously survived the crash. It was no good though. Even if he'd been able to move his shattered right arm, he could never reach it with his fading strength. The smoking man took one final pull of his cigarette, putting it out on the side of the vehicle and pocketing the stub. Then he reached through the broken driver's side window, Alex catching a slight whiff of cigarette smoke blended with an unrecognizable but pleasant cologne. The man reached across Alex and grabbed the phone, pulling back and looking down at Alex's shattered right hand. After a moment, he reached down once more and put the phone in Alex's left hand. "Thank you." The words were barely a whisper. He had to concentrate now, willing the pressing darkness to part just long enough for one final task. The man once more placed his hand reassuringly on Alex's shoulder, and the darkness parted slightly, just enough for what Alex needed to do. He worked the phone awkwardly with his left hand, gritting his teeth through the pain of broken fingers. Opening a new message, he scrolled down his contacts. G, H, I, J, finally, K. He found her name at last, then began typing out a message. "I still think about you every time it rains." He moved his thumb to press send, but that's when Alex's body failed him at last, the phone tumbling out of his grasp. But the man was there to catch it. Moving blindly fast, he snatched the falling phone up and held it carefully to Alex's eyes before pressing send. He held the phone there for Alex to see through his fading vision until at last, message sent, confirmed successful delivery. The rain began once more, temperamental as it always is in the Pacific Northwest. Fat, heavy raindrops fell on the scene of a terrible accident, the victim seemingly having died on impact. On his lap, though, lay his phone, and somewhere far away and far below this dark mountainside, a message notification chirped on a distant phone.
SCP-4999 manifests to only one person at a time, and only when they are alone. All subjects to date have been in the final stages of a terminal illness, suffering from a life-threatening injury, or otherwise on their deathbed. It also appears that all subjects have personalities and lives that could be described as nondescript, insignificant, or otherwise unremarkable. No testing of SCP-4999 has been authorized by the Foundation due to both the difficulty in predicting where it will appear
as well as the fact that observation seems to prevent the anomaly from appearing. There are also ethical concerns, since many in the Foundation feel that SCP-4999 is providing an important service to humanity, even if it is only for those on the margins of society, and it is debated whether this should be one anomalous creature that is allowed to continue its existence and its work without interference.
A tangled mass of yarn and ribbon sounds more like what you'd find in the back room of a craft store or a forgotten closet than a mysterious creature worthy of investigation. And yet that's exactly what SCP-066 appeared to be, or at least it did at first glance. But the SCP Foundation doesn't contain and study just anything, and there was, and still is, something incredibly strange just below the surface of SCP-066, also known as Eric's Toy. At first, Eric's Toy seemed to be completely harmless and even helpful, a knot of string that produced strange but harmless items and effects. But the Foundation soon discovered a dark side to SCP-066. While it may be referred to as a toy, this is no mere plaything. SCP-066 weighs only about 1 kilogram and appears to be a braided bunch of yarn and ribbon. Though there is no apparent musical capability within the strands of yarn and ribbon themselves, music can be produced by moving individual strands one at a time. When it was first being studied, this SCP was composed of multicolored strings and ribbons, but it has since undergone a transformation and now presents an appearance somewhat different from its initial description. The strands of yarn and ribbon can be used to play the notes of a diatonic scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, though the research has not been able to determine just how SCP-066 produces music, or any sound at all. SCP-066 was thought to be completely benign at first and was classified as safe, but following an incident known as Incident 066-2, its classification was adjusted to a subcategory of Euclid Impetus. Euclid is a classification given to SCPs that are more difficult to contain than those classified as safe. Impetus in Latin means attack, and specifies that SCP-066 is not only Euclid class, but on the more aggressive side. While 066 is not always aggressive towards humans, the events of Incident 066-2 prove that it is highly unpredictable and should not be provoked. Like many SCPs, it proved that underestimating its capabilities can be a dangerous mistake. Before the incident, SCP-066 displayed only charming, if unusual, behavior. Various researchers spent their time playing random assortment of notes using its strings, curious about what would happen, and determined to record anything this unusual ball of string had to offer. They did not yet know that the creature was capable of any hostility, and went about their work with a lighthearted, carefree spirit. After playing an improvised 6-note melody with the strands, a researcher was thrilled to find that SCP-066 was capable of shapeshifting. Its appearance changed to resemble a small calico kitten for 17 minutes. The kitten was incredibly friendly, rubbing its head against the researcher's gloved hand and purring loudly. Ironically enough, the kitten also spent time playing with a piece of string. After the 17 minutes were up, the kitten transformed back into SCP-066's original form. A few days later, another researcher played a different melody on the strands and was surprised to find that, when they stopped, the music continued on its own. The sound of an acoustic guitar kicked in, accompanied by vocals with no visible source for either sound. The SCP then played a 4-minute song with lyrics warning against the use of sharp objects without the supervision of a parent, especially scissors. After the song ended, the SCP was silent for the rest of the day. The following week, a research assistant used the strands of SCP-066 to play the opening notes of Happy Birthday, and a chocolate cupcake with a lit birthday candle appeared from within the braided strings. Against the warning of his peers, the assistant ate the cupcake. In response, the SCP played the rest of Happy Birthday, and the assistant suffered no adverse effects from the cupcake. All of this fun was brought to a swift end when one scientist suggested that a portion of SCP-066's yarn body be cut off and removed so that the specimen could be tested. On April 18, 2008, the event that would become known as Incident 066-2 took place. A young man known only as D-066-4437, or D, was assigned to the task. Naturally, he was a member of the highly disposable D-class personnel. But D was grateful for the opportunity, as most experiments of a similar nature involved quite a bit more obvious risk. It was a simple enough job. Take a pair of scissors, snip off some yarn, and bring it back to the lab for further study. It was hardly on the level of supervising 173, or being 682's latest chew toy. He entered the containment room, where SCP-066 was lying dormant and still, and approached it with scissors. He grabbed a small handful of string and started to cut. As soon as the scissors began to cut through the fabric, the SCP rolled out of his grasp. It came to a stop 1 meter away, where it started to make a high-pitched squeaking sound resembling the cry of a frightened rabbit. Unsure what to do and unprepared for this scenario, D approached the entity again. He snagged another fistful of yarn and cut, only for 066 to curl into a ball and roll away from him again, even faster this time. Once it was safely on the other side of the room and away from the scissors, it stopped moving. Only this time, it didn't squeak. Instead, for the very first time since its containment, it spoke in a deep, uncannily human voice and asked, "Are you Eric?" After recovering from his initial shock at hearing a voice come out of a massive string, D responded, "No, I'm not." This answer set something off in SCP-066, and its form began to shift and change. The string wriggled around on the floor, unbraiding and wrapping around itself into a mound. The colors, previously a rainbow of shades, shifted until every strand was a blood red. Much to D's horror, the transformation was not yet complete. Small bumps began to emerge from the spaces between the strands of yarn, popping out all over the bright red mass. If that wasn't terrifying enough, suddenly all together as one, they blinked open, revealing themselves to be over a dozen small eyes. Every single eye was focused at D, studying him, staring him down. SCP-066 then began to produce loud, abrupt, dissonant notes like someone banging on the keys of a piano. D had seen enough. He abandoned his task and fled the containment room. After this failed attempt to extract a sample, SCP-066's behavior and its treatment of personnel who interacted with it began to change dramatically. Before the incident, the SCP was largely dormant, only becoming active if a melody was played using its strands. Following the incident and its change of form, 066 began to move on its own. Long strands of its yarn body would move like tentacles, writhing and wriggling around at high speed. It no longer needed human interaction in order to produce sound or to produce any other effects. At the sight of any human, regardless of the human's behavior, the SCP would begin to react with sound and effect within 6 seconds. The first of these effects was noted by a research assistant who entered the SCP's containment facility a week after the incident with D. As she approached 066 to take notes about its current state and its new ability to move, a bee appeared out of nowhere. It stung the assistant and flew away before it could be captured. Weeks later, a team of 11 personnel were monitoring the SCP when it suddenly burst into a rendition of Beethoven's Second Symphony. It produced this music at a volume of over 140 decibels, permanently deafening 3 of the personnel and causing permanent hearing damage in the other 8. It was theorized that the SCP did this as an act of retribution for its perceived mistreatment. These personnel refused to work with SCP-066 again. When a new team was assigned to monitor the entity, everything seemed to be going well at first. It was moving around, flailing its tentacles of yarn at nothing in particular, and staring at the personnel with its many eyes, but otherwise was on its best behavior. Then, suddenly, every light in the room went dark, and there was a complete loss of visibility. The lights were unable to be turned on for 5 hours, and any attempt at an alternate light source, such as a flashlight, was unsuccessful. It was as if the darkness in the room swallowed any and all light right up. It was similar to the oppressive darkness within SCP-087, or the unlimited black of SCP-3001's Shadow Dimension. The personnel in the room later reported hearing the sound of loud, labored breathing just behind their shoulders, though when they searched for a source of the sound, they could find nothing. There had been no recent anomalies reported, or any additional hostile behavior. Instead, whenever it sees a new human, SCP-066 repeats the name Eric again and again in the same deep voice. Who is Eric? No one at the facility knows, or if they do, they have not reported it to any official channels. It is possible that the SCP was once owned by someone named Eric, and perhaps, given the circumstances under which SCP-066 first said the name, Eric attempted to cut the threads of the entity while it was in his care. Unfortunately, there are no official records of how SCP-066 was discovered, or why it was brought to the Foundation in the first place. Its origins remain murky and as mysterious as everything else about it. All that is known is that, whoever Eric is, SCP-066 is determined to find him. Once the SCP's class was changed from safe to Euclid, its containment procedures had to be adjusted. While it was previously kept in a simple room, It is now contained in a tungsten carbide box at its site's high-value item storage facility. Once a month, the box is inspected for damage to its interior, due to the SCP's tendency to use its appendages to wear down the walls of the box over time. If there is any damage, SCP-066 is to be moved to a new box using a robotic arm that performs this transfer in less than 3 seconds. The Foundation has attempted to place recording devices in the box with the entity in order to monitor its behavior when there are no humans present, but the SCP destroys every recording device placed inside of its containment box, and any attempts to record its behavior when it is not being observed by humans have been unsuccessful. Whatever it's doing when there is no one around, it wants to keep a secret. On the surface, SCP-066 is one of the less frightening finds contained within the walls of the SCP Foundation. It does not have claws or teeth or the ability to cause mass deaths, but it has incredible, unpredictable capabilities and seems very capable of holding a grudge. There is so much that is unknown about it, from its origins to its form to its ability to manifest matter from nothing. And there is something deeply unsettling about this SCP's unpredictable behavior and increased hostility towards being observed. We do not know what it has done, and we do not know what it will do next. All we can do is wonder. As we ponder the nature of SCP-066, it does nothing but sit, staring with unblinking eyes, waiting for Eric to come back.
The year was 1857, and the Second Opium War was raging between China and the combined forces of the English and French. It was one of the many bloody colonial wars fought over resources like tea, sugar, and the intoxicating opium poppy. It was a war fought by peasants and noblemen alike. One of these aristocratic soldiers was the noble Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, the quintessential English gentleman and explorer. While his fellow soldiers cowered behind cover, Lord Blackwood charged into the fray, shouldering his rifle and firing his pistol into the crowd of opposing soldiers. It was the Battle of Canton, one of the most crucial battles of the entire conflict. The French and English were laying siege to the city of Canton, also known as Guangzhou, to prove their military dominance and capture an important Chinese government official. Lord Blackwood led the charge on horseback. Every bullet seemed to find the heart of a foe. He was a true hero among men, a gentleman warrior with class, refinement, and style. And it would be thanks to his expert leadership and marksmanship on the field that the Allied European forces won the battle decisively. Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood is a name that deserves to be counted among Lord Horatio Nelson, Sir Francis Bacon, and Sir Walter Raleigh. In addition to being a skilled and honorable fighter, Lord Blackwood is a consummate explorer, naturalist, and frontiersman. During his heyday, he traveled perhaps further than any man across the known and unknown corners of the globe. He made scientific, biological, and anthropological discoveries that should have reset the course of society forever. And yet, you won't find any records in the history books of Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, nor will you find any grand oil paintings or dedicated wings in British museums. This is because Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood is a 4.5-inch telepathic neon sea slug, and he's known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-1867. While he would never admit to it, Lord Blackwood belongs to the species Nembrotha kubariana, also known as the variable neon slug. He's kept in a standard aquarium in a Foundation containment site, and is physically no different to any other member of his species. What makes Lord Blackwood unique is his powerful telepathic abilities, specifically, the power to communicate by speaking directly into people's minds. And what's more, he's extremely talkative. But to what extent is anything that this anomalous sea slug says true? Or is he just like SCP-082 Ferdinand the Cannibal, a creative and pathological liar? It isn't committed to record how exactly the Foundation discovered Lord Blackwood. Perhaps a local aquarium worker worried they were going insane when they heard the voice of a 19th century English nobleman ringing in their ears whenever they were cleaning algae out of the tank. Maybe Lord Blackwood was found by SCP Foundation divers, who are constantly combing the ocean for anomalous creatures and activity. What we do know is that Lord Blackwood is an incredibly strange and mysterious individual. He claims to have visited locations all around the world and encountered rare societies and creatures. The Foundation was skeptical about a number of Lord Blackwood's more outlandish claims, on account of him being a sea slug. but he does appear to have the knowledge to back up his supposed experience. Interviews with Lord Blackwood have shown that he's extremely knowledgeable in the areas of geography, zoology, botany, archaeology, anthropology, and linguistics relating to his claimed regions of exploration, as well as more esoteric fields such as obscure mythology, mysticism, and cryptozoology. In other words, if Lord Blackwood hadn't gone on his escapades around the globe throughout history, how would he have come to possess this wide variety of information? The Foundation was getting frustrated and began to probe further into the personal life of the most interesting gastropod in containment. Lord Blackwood, under questioning, was always polite and amicable with Foundation staff. He seemed to display no real knowledge of the fact that he himself was a sea slug, going as far to accuse other people of being crazy or drunk when they brought the fact up to him. While none of Lord Blackwood's tall tales ever extend past the year 1910, he told fanciful stories of exploring the Americas and of his involvement in the Second Opium War on the side of the English. Naturally, the Foundation wanted proof. When they pressured Lord Blackwood on this, something even stranger happened. He gave it. The Lord told his interviewers that he would happily donate his collection to them if it gave them cause to believe what he was saying. He gave the baffled Foundation researchers the address of a cottage in England where they could find the secrets to his bizarre and mysterious past, and local agents in the area followed up on the information. Upon investigation, Foundation field agents did indeed find the cottage that Lord Blackwood had specified. It was being maintained by an extremely old woman. When questioned about her presence there, she said that she was keeping the house for Lord Blackwood and gave no more useful information. Incidentally, it appears that this singular purpose was all that this old woman was living for. She abruptly passed away from heart failure 5 days after the Foundation commandeered the cottage. Whether anything truly anomalous caused this, we still do not know. At first, the cottage seemed normal, until the field agents discovered a secret basement housing Lord Blackwood's collection. They were amazed at what they saw. The basement consisted of zoological and botanical specimens, over 3,000 artifacts, a library containing over 5,000 items, and a functioning 1800s scientific laboratory. It took about 3 weeks for Foundation agents working round the clock in shifts to remove all the items from Lord Blackwood's mysterious collection, and what they found raised even more questions. The collection included, but was no means limited to, 116 unknown species of plants, 107 unknown species of insects, 28 unknown species of lizards, 23 unknown species of fish, 14 unknown species of amphibians, 12 unknown species of mammals, fossils pertaining to 8 unknown species of dinosaur, fossils pertaining to 12 unknown species of prehistoric mammal, and artifacts belonging to 29 unknown indigenous societies. That's a lot of unknowns. But wait, there's more. His collection also contained a collection of seemingly unknown firearms, including 3 wide-bore muskets marked as Dr. B.T. Moth's effective particle destabilizers, detailed globes of Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Galilean moons, accompanied by notes detailing possible paths of surface exploration, a heavily modified carriage containing instruments of unknown purpose. A note attached to the door reads, "On the fritz, speak with Henry," and a highly dangerous and seemingly anomalous machine that killed 4 Foundation field agents before it was destroyed on site. And when questioned about this little fiasco, Lord Blackwood responded, "I did warn you to be careful around my collection. That bloody thing nearly took my head off back in '97 when I found it." However, there was one thing recovered from Lord Blackwood's collection that was perhaps more interesting than all the others. 35 handwritten journals containing recordings of events described by Lord Blackwood in his grandiose tall tales to the Foundation researchers. The accounts are generally identical to the stories he had told, save for some slight variations and exaggerations on the part of Blackwood in the retelling. Most interestingly of all of these journals have been dated to the appropriate time period of the events described by Foundation scientists. While his stories are too numerous to all be shared here, there's one that perfectly sums them all up. Lord Blackwood's account of a possible encounter with SCP-1000, also known as Bigfoot, in Seattle during the mid-1800s. Lord Blackwood, seeking to explore the so-called New World of North America, embarked with an assistant and an indigenous American guide to the Pacific Northwest in search of the legendary Sasquatch. The trio was headed for Mount Rainier, then known as Tahoma, During the journey, Lord Blackwood found a young fox caught in a trap that had been set by a local tribe. He took sympathy on the animal and freed it, allowing it to run away to safety. That night, he and his assistant met up with the rest of his guide's tribe, and they settled down for the evening. However, things took a disastrous turn when the camp was raided by a rival tribe. Almost everyone was slaughtered in the process, and Lord Blackwood and his two companions were hauled away by the enemy tribe for a sinister purpose: sacrifice to a violent local deity. As it turns out, the creature that this tribe worshipped was the very same one Lord Blackwood and the others were trying to find, a particularly large and aggressive Sasquatch. Each night, a different sacrifice was made to the Sasquatch. The victim would be placed near a forest clearing while the tribe played a primal song, and the Sasquatch would emerge from the trees to devour its prey. The first night, it ate the assistant. The next night, it ate the guide. And then, it became time for the sacrifice of Lord Blackwood himself. As Blackwood was presented for sacrifice, he accepted his fate. But instead of the Sasquatch, a legion of woodland animals emerged from the trees: foxes, elks, raccoons, and more, themselves painted with tribal symbols. The animals seemed to be on Lord Blackwood's side, and attacked the tribespeople who had been holding him captive, giving Blackwood the chance to flee into the forest during the chaos. Later, these same animals would find Blackwood again and present him with things his captors had stolen from him. An elder fox also gave him a letter, proclaiming him a knight of their people now. He was allowed safe passage back to a nearby settlement, at which point he wrote to his financiers back in England, explaining the situation and asking for more money to perform further expeditions into the Tahoma region. The whole incident had only increased his thirst for adventure and exploration. Whether this tale is actually true, or just a bizarre colonial fantasy from the pathological mind of a telepathic sea slug, we may never know. But it doesn't make it any less interesting. To this day, Lord Blackwood continues to be a perplexing but fascinating anomaly. He may not be the most dangerous, and he may not be the most useful either, but there's no denying that perhaps we'd all like to sit next to his tank for a couple hours one day and hear him spin a good yarn over a warm cup of tea. Who doesn't love dogs? They're friendly, energetic, and can be beneficial to their owner's happiness and mental health. On top of all those positive qualities, most dogs are fiercely loyal to their masters. You'll often hear stories of dogs defending their owners or even staying by their side through their very last days, and even sticking next to them beyond death. As sad as that thought might be to many dog owners, it provides us the perfect context for today's topic. It's about time you met SCP-1111. Sometimes also known by the nickname the White Dog. This moniker actually refers to one of the two halves of SCP-1111, namely the former, SCP-1111-1, while its counterpart is simply known only as SCP-1111-2. As you may have already deduced, SCP-1111-1 is, or at least appears to be, a fairly common domesticated dog. Sporting white fur that gives it its nickname, the White Dog is a cross between two different popular breeds, the German Shepherd and the Labrador Retriever. However, upon closer inspection, this particular pup is a far cry from one you might see fetching sticks or chasing squirrels at the park. For one, this dog never eats or drinks. Under normal circumstances, that would be worrying behavior in any dog, but in SCP-1111-1's case, it comes second to the fact that this dog is partially see-through. Now that's definitely not normal. In actual fact, this pooch is pretty far from ordinary. It seems to be at least semi-translucent, not quite as much as we usually picture a ghost or hologram, but also not fully visible like a living being. In fact, how clearly visible the White Dog is can vary depending on how close it is to 1111-2. Any further than 500 meters away and the dog will gradually grow more and more transparent, but not fully invisible. But visibility isn't the only thing that shifts with 1111-1's distance from its other half. The size of the dog also changes. It remains standing at 150 centimeters when directly beneath 1111-2, and gradually gets smaller the further and further away from 1111-2 it gets. Finally, there's its eyes. SCP-1111-1 possesses a distinct pair of glowing red eyes. the brightness and intensity of which increase the closer it is to 1111-2. So let's recap. So far, we have a strange white dog with glowing eyes that changes size and becomes more or less visible the further it gets from a secondary element. But if the white dog is SCP-1111-1, then what forms this second part of SCP-1111? Well, if you were to look close enough at the white dog, you'd notice the red collar that it wears around its neck. And hanging from that collar is a tag, on which is printed one single word: loyal. It's certainly a fitting word to describe 1111-1. Why? Because SCP-1111-2 is presumably the dog's master, or rather, its master's dead body. Dressed in an old, worn business suit and formal dress shoes, SCP-1111-2 appears to be a deceased male of indeterminate age. The precise identity of this man has proven next to impossible for Foundation researchers to determine. The condition of his suit and shoes have deteriorated so much that it has been difficult to even identify the original company that produced the clothing worn by the corpse. As for his cause of death, well, that unfortunately seems all too obvious, given that the 1111-2 body always appears the same way, hanging from a tree with a noose around his neck. Foundation staff observed the two parts that make up SCP-1111 have noted that 1111-2 will occasionally make quick, violent twitching movements. These random jerks and spasms of the corpse are consistent with those exhibited by a person who is dying from asphyxiation, and often researchers have heard the body making desperate gasps for air. The closer his white furried canine counterpart is, the more frequent and violent these motions and sounds will become. It's almost as if SCP-1111-2 has somehow been trapped on the very brink of death, reliving those final moments over and over again, all while guarded by his loyal white dog. If left alone and not interfered with, the white dog will lie down just beneath where its master's body is hanging. The dog never sleeps, nor does it require any food or water, and does not even seem to breathe. And as long as Foundation research staff keep their distance, both parts of SCP-1111 seem content to remain in a docile state. To keep them contained, the SCP Foundation has established a 2-kilometer safe zone around SCP-1111, keeping them monitored through cameras attached to weather balloons. The restricted enclosure is, according to a public cover story, a weather monitoring station, hence the balloons. No member of Foundation staff is permitted anywhere within a kilometer of SCP-1111, unless they are given express permission from a superior member of the Foundation. Should SCP-1111-1 ever stray away from the tree where its master hangs, though, then the area must be evacuated of all personnel until the dog returns to its normal position. However, Foundation staff are urged to be wary when approaching SCP-1111, because the white dog may well be more ferociously loyal than any pet. Emphasis on ferocious. The moment that 1111-1 becomes aware of anything coming towards itself and its owner's body, the dog will become viciously hostile. Regardless of the person or object coming towards it, the semi-corporeal canine will attempt to attack and destroy the intruder. In this state, the white dog exhibits even more dramatic physiological differences from a normal domesticated dog. Video footage recorded by the SCP Foundation shows that the dog is capable of reaching incredible speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour, which is, of course, considerably faster than an average canine. The white dog can also reach a height of 6 meters when jumping up into the air, and has teeth and a bite strength powerful enough to tear through armor plating composed of 15mm thick titanium. Given the entity's speed, aggression, and translucent qualities, any attempts by the SCP Foundation to neutralize the white dog or even capture it for closer examination have ended the same grisly way for the staff members who tried. The creature's fierce loyalty defending its owner's body also make it incredibly difficult for Foundation staff to even get close enough to SCP-1111-2 to properly study the remains. As we said before, that loyal tag around the dog's neck is certainly an accurate description. On a date which has been redacted from its file, an incident occurred involving SCP-1111 and a team that consisted of a number of Foundation agents. This team had been ordered to neutralize the white dog and transport the anomalous animal to a containment facility. Attempting to evade the creature's direct line of sight, the agents approached the hanging body of SCP-1111-2 from the north, the opposite direction to the way the dog was facing.
possessing a sense of hearing and smell far beyond that of a human being. The white dog was able to quickly detect the agents approaching its master. When the team got within 300 meters of the tree where the body was hanging, the canine set upon them, tearing at clothing and shredding protective armor with its teeth in order to get to the agent's soft flesh underneath. One of these agents fled, running as fast as they could from the area. But of course, this was a futile move, as the white dog quickly noticed and began to pursue the Foundation agent with its superpowered speed. As it chased them, the surveillance cameras recorded SCP-1111-1 decreasing in size, becoming harder to see with the naked eye the further it ran from the tree. The dog's speed began to decline too. The further the dog got from the tree with the noose, the less the body hanging from it seemed to be spasming too. When the white dog had reached 900 meters from SCP-1111-2, the corpse was seen to stop moving entirely, frozen and stiff as one would normally expect a deceased body to be. Realizing how far away it was from its master, SCP-1111-1 froze. Appearing unsure for a moment, it turned to look towards the body of its master, perhaps sensing that the random jerks and post-mortem movements had stopped. At this point, the dog howled and sprinted back towards the tree, causing the corpse of its owner to begin twitching yet again. Footage of this incident showed that the white dog was impervious to conventional weapons, and any rounds fired at the canine by Foundation agents merely passed through its ghostly body. However, its claws and teeth were very much solid, and it was able to slaughter almost all the agents, save for the one who fled, who ended up being the sole survivor of the encounter. Following this disastrous mission, the O5 Council issued an order that, in order to protect the lives of Foundation personnel, only remote-controlled drones and expendable D-Class personnel would be permitted anywhere near SCP-1111. Shortly after the previous incident, a group of D-Class were sent into the area around the tree where SCP-1111-2 was hanging, this time approaching from multiple directions at once. But this only led to the same results, as the white dog began to quickly move between each of the D-Classes, killing them one after another. Only one, D-83011, was able to make it close enough to the corpse to make any noteworthy observations. As they approached, the hanging corpse of SCP-1111-2 seemed to slow its jerks and twitches, and the body did something that had never been seen before. It opened its eyes. It raised its arms towards the approaching D-Class in what looked like a welcoming hug, only for D-83011 to be torn to shreds by the white dog moments after. Cameras nearby picked up more previously unseen movement, namely the owner's mouth moving almost as if he was saying the words, "No, down boy." But soon after, the corpse fell limp again and resumed its normal twitches. Following this, the Foundation have theorized that the white dog could possibly be contained by somehow removing its master's body from the area. Some staff have also noted that SCP-1111 shares certain traits with SCP-023, a similar anomalous creature also referred to as the Black Shuck. Much like the white dog, the Shuck also possesses a ghostly canine form, and appears to be the same large dog-like creature that is referenced in ancient folklore from throughout the British Isles. According to legend, the Shuck appears to travelers at crossroads, serving as an omen of bad luck, impending disaster, and is even thought to be one of the Hounds of Hell itself. SCP-023, like SCP-1111, also has anomalous abilities that focus on geographic space. In the Black Shuck's case, anyone it detects approaching it will die or lose a member of their family within a year. Researchers working for the Foundation believe that SCP-023 and SCP-1111-1 could be related, or even instances of the same phenomenon, a sort of dog yin and yang. But since they have still, as of yet, been unable to capture the white dog, it has been impossible to verify this. The SCP Foundation will no doubt keep trying though. While testing may have been suspended for the time being, they always know where to find SCP-1111-1, beneath its master's hanging body, guarding it for all eternity. Now go check out SCP-1913 Deadly Monster Squad The Furies, and SCP-2845 Alien God Crash Lands on Earth The Deer for more animal SCPs you have to see to believe.